Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had Katsuki's heart part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story minimeowngi from AO3. So let's start the video. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long, golden shadows that stretch across the quiet streets. The air is thick with the heat of the late afternoon, but the tension between Katsuki and Izuku is colder than any breeze. They patrol together in an uneasy silence, a shared sense of competition hanging between them like an unspoken challenge. Today marks the last day of their work studies, and neither of them intends to let the other outshine them, at least, not without a fight. Izuku glances over at Katsuki, who is walking a few steps ahead, his brow furrowed in his usual scowl. The faint crackling of sparks dances across his hands, the only indication of the restless energy that constantly churns within him. It's a habit, a way of releasing some of the explosive tension that always seems to be bubbling just beneath the surface. Izuku, on the other hand, keeps his focus ahead, his pace steady and measured, trying to calm his own nerves by simply keeping busy. "This is boring," Katsuki mutters under his breath, his voice thick with frustration. He kicks a stray rock off the sidewalk, the sound echoing through the otherwise silent street. Nothing but old ladies crossing the street and wannabe heroes taking selfies. Let's find some real action. Izuku gives a small, knowing sigh. "Patrols are important too, Kaken," he replies, his tone patient but firm. "Not every day has to be a battlefield." Katsuki scoffs loudly, shaking his head. But before either of them can get into their usual back and forth, a loud crash shatters the calm. The sound of glass shattering and metal crumpling echoes down the block ahead of them, drawing their attention like a flare in the night sky. Without another word, both of them spring into action. Their footsteps in unison, they break into a sprint, the thrill of the chase setting their adrenaline alight. They round the corner, and the scene unfurls before them. A small convenience store under siege, its windows shattered and the door barely hanging from its hinges. Inside, two villains are in the midst of a robbery. One is a towering man with muscles bulging under his torn shirt, his eyes wide with manic energy. The other is a woman, small but calculating, her eyes sharp and focused on every movement. There's no fear in her expression, only the cold confidence of someone used to being in control. Katsuki's lips curl into a fierce grin. Finally, he growls, his eyes lighting up with the thrill of the fight. "Stay out of my way, Deku." Izuku doesn't respond to the usual taunt. Instead, he activates his communicator, sending a quick message to 𝗧𝗏. "𝗧𝗏, we've got two villains, super strength and ranged attacks. We'll need backup and the police." "Got it. Be there soon," 𝗧𝗏's calm voice crackles through the static. Without missing a beat, the fight begins. Katsuki is a blur of motion, charging at the woman with a ferocity that can only come from someone desperate for an outlet for his anger. Explosions rock the air as he launches blast after blast, forcing her to dodge and dive, her weapons rattling to the ground as she's pushed into close combat. Izuku takes on the super strong man. His focus sharpens as he uses his agility and the power of one for all to stay one step ahead of the villain's thunderous punches. The ground cracks under each devastating swing, and Izuku dodges just in time, feeling the rush of wind from the near misses. His body moves on instinct, but his mind races, calculating his next move as he continues to dodge and strike. "You're dragging your feet, Deku," Katsuki shouts, his voice harsh over the chaos. But there's a certain pride in it too. His fighting style is ruthless, relentless, and he's not about to let anyone, especially not Izuku, outdo him. "I'm not dragging anything, Kaken," Izuku yells back, narrowly evading another punch. "Focus on your own fight." Katsuki's explosions fill the air, lighting up the chaos like fireworks. The woman barely has time to react before she's cornered, her weapons discarded, forced to fight hand to hand. Izuku's opponent is a different story. The villain's strength seems limitless, and each strike is more than enough to flatten anything in its path. Izuku's breath comes in sharp bursts, using his speed and precision to stay just out of reach, dodging blows that would crush any normal person. His heart beats faster, not just from the adrenaline, but because he knows that if he falters, even for a moment, he could be down for the count. For a brief moment, Izuku allows himself a glance toward Katsuki. There's a flicker of pride in his eye. Katsuki's precision, his aggression, the raw power in every movement. Everything about him is unmatched, even in the heat of battle. But his brief distraction comes at a cost. The woman's eyes widen in panic, and she shouts something frantic and unintelligible. Before Katsuki can react, a burst of invisible energy erupts from her body, sending him flying backward as though struck by an unseen force. Kaken! Izuku's voice cracks as he abandons his fight immediately, throwing himself toward his fallen friend. His heart as he reaches him just in time to catch Katsuki, his body limp and unresponsive, like a rag doll. Damn it, Izuku mutters under his breath, his mind racing. He gently lowers Katsuki to the ground, hands shaking as he checks for injuries, but there's no sign of anything immediately life-threatening. His pulse quickens. What if it's something worse? Izuku! Shudo's voice cuts through his panic as he arrives with the police, his ice powers surging forward to freeze the super-strong villain in place. The woman is quickly apprehended, and in the rush of activity, Izuku barely registers the movement around him. His focus is entirely on Katsuki, whose body remains still, unnervingly so. Kaken, wake up, Izuku whispers, his voice breaking, trembling as he brushes a stray lock of blonde hair from Katsuki's forehead. You're okay, right? You always are, but Katsuki doesn't stir. His body is completely still, and Izuku's stomach drops with a heaviness he can't shake. The air feels thick and suffocating as Izuku and Shudo rush through the halls of UA, Katsuki's unconscious body draped over Izuku's back. The weight is heavier than it should be, and though Katsuki doesn't appear to have any visible injuries, the limpness of his body feels wrong. Katsuki, always full of energy, never still, is anything but that in this moment. Seeing him this way, so fragile and unmoving, tugs at something deep in Izuku's. Shudo strides beside him, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders is unmistakable. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the sound of hurried footsteps and the soft rustling of Katsuki's costume. Izuku's heart with each step, dread crawling up his spine. When they reach the infirmary, Recovery Girl is already waiting for them, her sharp eyes flicking over the scene with practiced efficiency. Set him down there, she directs, her voice calm but insistent as she gestures to one of the beds. What happened? Izuku gently lowers Katsuki onto the bed, his movements careful as though the wrong touch might shatter something delicate. He brushes off the dust from Katsuki's singed costume, trying not to focus on how unnervingly still his friend is. He was hit by a quirk during the fight. We're not sure exactly what it does yet, there weren't any immediate effects, but it knocked him out cold. Shudo, who had been standing off to the side, nods in agreement. He took a direct hit. There's no visible damage, but we didn't want to take any chances by waiting for something to show up. Recovery Girl hums thoughtfully, her eyes narrowing slightly as she begins to examine Katsuki. Her movements are quick and precise, honed by years of experience. She shines a small light into Katsuki's unresponsive eyes, checks his pulse, and presses along his limbs, feeling for any hidden fractures or breaks. Izuku stands off to the side, his hands twisting together nervously as his thoughts race. What if it's something serious? What if the quirk isn't physical, but something mental? His mind spirals, the possibilities growing darker with each passing second. He wants to say something, but the words are caught in his throat, trapped by the weight of the unknown. He's stable, Recovery Girl says after a moment, her voice cutting through the fog of Izuku's anxiety. No injuries beyond some bruising. I'll monitor him closely. The effects of the quirk might take time to show. Izuku exhales shakily, relief flooding through him, but it's tempered by lingering concern. He takes a tentative step forward, his voice barely above a whisper. So he'll wake up soon, right? That depends on how his body responds, Recovery Girl answers, her gaze softening as she looks at Izuku. The quirk might have induced unconsciousness, or he could just be recovering from the fight. Either way, you did the right thing bringing him here quickly. Thanks, recovery girl, Izuku murmurs, his voice low and filled with gratitude, though his eyes never leave Katsuki's face. Shudo steps toward the door, his voice quiet but firm. I'll let the others know what's happening. Call me if anything changes. Izuku nods absently, his attention still entirely fixed on Katsuki. He watches his friend's unmoving 𝗧𝗵𝗲, searching for any sign of life, any small indication that Katsuki is still with them. The sound of the heart monitor's rhythmic beep is almost too loud in the stillness of the room. Minutes stretch into what feels like hours, but there's no change, no flicker of awareness, no shift in the tension that has settled over the room like a storm cloud. Recovery girl steps out briefly to check on other patients, leaving Izuku alone with Katsuki. The silence feels heavier now, oppressive in its weight. Izuku leans forward, his elbows resting on his knees as he watches Katsuki's face, hoping, praying for any sign that he's coming back to them. Kaken, Izuku whispers, his voice barely audible as his fingers curl into tight fists. You're going to be fine. You always are. You're the strongest person I know. His throat tightens, the words heavy with more than just hope. But seeing you like this, it's scary. You're never the one who needs saving. Katsuki doesn't respond. His face remains relaxed in a way Izuku almost never sees. There's no scowl, no flash of irritation, just an unsettling stillness that makes Izuku's heart ache. I'll stay here, Izuku says softly, his voice thick with determination. No matter how long it takes. I'll be right here, Kaken. And he does. Time drags on, the minutes bleeding into one another as the sun sinks lower outside the infirmary windows. Recovery girl checks on them periodically, her calm presence a small comfort, but Izuku refuses to leave. The exhaustion of the day's events clings to him, but he remains by Katsuki's side, his eyes never straying from the still form on the bed. Finally, just as the clock nears midnight, something shifts. Katsuki's fingers twitch first, the motion subtle but unmistakable. Then his eyelids flutter, and for a brief moment, Izuku's heart stops. Kaken! Izuku exclaims, jumping to his feet, his voice trembling with a mix of relief and urgency. You're awake. Katsuki blinks groggily, his crimson eyes unfocused at first, like he's not sure where he is or what's happening. His voice is rough, laced with confusion and irritation. Deku. Izuku leans over the bed, his breath catching in his throat. I'm here, he says quickly, a soft smile breaking through the worry. You're okay. You're back at UA. Katsuki frowns, his expression sharpening, even through the haze of grogginess. What the hell happened? Izuku hesitates for a moment before answering, his voice soft but steady. You got hit by a quirk. It knocked you out cold. Recovery girl says you're fine, but we weren't sure until you woke up. Katsuki groans, lifting a hand weakly to rub at his forehead. I remember now. Can't believe 𝗧𝗵𝗲 managed to knock me out. That's okay, Izuku reassures him, his voice gentle. What matters is that you're awake now. Katsuki squints at him, his gaze narrowing with suspicion. How long was I out? A few hours, Izuku admits, his voice quieter now. I stayed with you. Katsuki scoffs, but there's a softness in his eyes that Izuku can't quite place. You're such a 𝗬𝗏 nerd. Izuku chuckles softly, the tension finally easing from his shoulders. Yeah, maybe. But I'm glad you're okay, Kaken. Katsuki doesn't respond, but the way his gaze lingers on Izuku speaks volumes. Izuku shifts uncomfortably under the intensity of it. Hold on, I'll get recovery girl. Izuku blurts, before standing abruptly and rushing out the door. He returns moments later, this time with recovery girl and a young apprentice who specializes in medical support. The apprentice moves toward Katsuki with practiced precision, her eyes glowing faintly as she activates her quirk. Good to see you awake, young Bakugu, recovery girl says briskly, her tone professional. Let's make sure there's no lasting damage. I'm fine, Katsuki grumbles, his voice stronger now, though still gruff. Stop fussing. The apprentice doesn't seem fazed by Katsuki's complaint, her glowing eyes scanning his body thoroughly. Izuku watches nervously, his body tense as he stands by, unable to keep his eyes off the small movements, the shifts in Katsuki's posture. A few moments later, the apprentice straightens, her expression neutral. No physical injuries, she reports. But there's still a lingering effect of an unknown quirk. Katsuki's scowl deepens. The hell does that mean? It means the quirk that hit you is still active in some way, the apprentice explains, her tone matter-of-fact. I can't identify what it does, but it hasn't worn off yet. Recovery girl sighs, stepping closer. If there are no immediate symptoms and you feel fine, there's not much more we can do. But you'll need to be monitored just in case. I told you I'm fine, Katsuki snaps, glaring at the apprentice. I don't feel any different. Be that as it may, recovery girl interjects firmly, Midoriya will keep an eye on you. And if anything unusual happens, I expect to be informed immediately. Izuku straightens, nodding with a seriousness that matches recovery girl's. Yes, ma'am. Katsuki glares at him. I don't need you babysitting me, nerd. Ignoring the jab, Izuku smiles nervously. It's not babysitting, Kaken. It's just making sure you're okay. Whatever, Katsuki mutters, establishing his legs over the side of the bed and pushing himself to his feet. He wobbles slightly, but steadies himself, glaring at Izuku when the younger boy instinctively moves to help. I'm fine, he repeats, his tone firm, though there's something about the way his gaze lingers on Izuku that's different. Recovery girl watches them both carefully before nodding. Take it easy for the night, Bakugo. We'll follow up tomorrow. Katsuki doesn't respond, brushing past Izuku and heading for the door. Izuku hesitates, but then hurries after him. Kaken, wait, he calls, his voice hesitant as they step into the quiet hallway. Katsuki stops but doesn't turn to face him. What now? Katsuki asks, his voice still gruff but softer than usual. Izuku catches up, his expression earnest. I'll walk you back to your room. Just in case. Katsuki finally turns, his crimson eyes narrowing, a small flicker of irritation flashing behind them. Do whatever you want, nerd. Just stay out of my way. Izuku nods, falling into step beside him. As they walk through the empty hallways, a nagging feeling tugs at Izuku's 𝗧𝗵𝗲, something he can't quite put his finger on. Katsuki isn't yelling as much, and his gaze feels unusually intense whenever it meets Izuku's. Maybe it's just the lingering effects of the quirk, Izuku tells himself, but a small part of him wonders if there's more to it than that. The walk back to the dorms is unusually quiet. Izuku follows behind Katsuki, his footsteps light but deliberate, trying not to disturb the heavy silence that stretches between them. Katsuki's pace is faster than usual, his footsteps loud as they echo down the empty hallway. His hands are shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders stiff, and he's staring straight ahead, as if there's nothing else in the world. Usually, the silence between them would be broken by Katsuki's usual barrage of insults. Stop hovering, nerd, or quit being so DM and clingy. But tonight, nothing. Not a word. Not even the typical scowl. Izuku feels a strange kind of tension in the air, a sense of something unspoken hanging between them. It makes his 𝗧𝗔 feel tight, his mind racing, but he can't bring himself to ask what's bothering Katsuki. Not when his usual fire seems to have dimmed, not when there's something almost fragile about him tonight. He can't quite put his finger on it, but it's unsettling. What's going on? He can't stand the silence any longer. He hesitates for a moment, glancing at Katsuki's back as he continues to march ahead, before quickening his pace to catch up. Kaken, Izuku starts, his voice tentative, unsure if his words will be welcomed or dismissed. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe we should. I'm fine, Deku, Katsuki interrupts, his voice flat and controlled. It's not harsh or snappish like usual, but it's not comforting either. It's just subdued. There's none of the usual edge, the bite that always accompanies his words, and it throws Izuku off balance. Izuku blinks, surprised. He'd expected a sharp retort, a snap of impatience, but instead there's only that quiet firmness, the kind that reminds Izuku of the resolve Katsuki always has. It doesn't sit right with him. This softer side of Katsuki, the one he almost never sees, is unnerving. He doesn't know what to say to that. Before he can process his confusion, Katsuki's sharp eyes flick to him. What are you gawking at? Nothing. Izuku stammers, hands raised in defense. He feels his cheeks flush, his thoughts still scrambling to catch up with the unexpected shift in their dynamic. Teeth, dumb nerd, Katsuki mutters under his breath, but this time there's no venom behind it. It's just a passing remark, like a default reaction, a habit he can't shake even when he's not truly mad. The change is subtle, but Izuku can't ignore it. He feels like he's walking on unfamiliar ground, trying to navigate this new version of Katsuki. And yet, he can't bring himself to ask what's really going on. By the time they reach the dorm building, Katsuki's pace slows just slightly, as if he's aware that Izuku is still trailing behind. He glances over at him, and for a split second his gaze softens, almost imperceptibly. You didn't get banged up earlier, did you? Izuku freezes, stunned by the question. He had expected a lot of things, gruff complaints, maybe a reminder to watch out for himself, but this is entirely new. Katsuki, concerned about him. Izuku's heart skips a beat. Izuku stammers, utterly caught off guard by the unexpected concern in Katsuki's voice. The fight, idiot, Katsuki grumbles, his eyes scanning Izuku's body like a hawk. That guy was throwing punches like a DMN wrecking ball. You didn't get hit, did you? Izuku blinks, his mind struggling to catch up. He shakes his head vigorously, waving his hands as if to dismiss the very idea. I'm fine. I didn't even take a direct hit. I'm okay, really. Katsuki's eyes narrow, studying him with a precision that makes Izuku feel like he's under a microscope. It's like Katsuki is trying to gauge whether he's lying. Without a word, Katsuki steps closer, his movements sharp and decisive. His hand shoots out, grabbing Izuku's arm with a grip that is firm, but not painful. It's possessive in its own way, and Izuku can't help but shiver at the unexpected contact. Let me see, Katsuki demands, his voice gruff but oddly serious. Izuku freezes, his heart racing. Kaken, I said but before he can finish, Katsuki rolls up his sleeve, his fingers moving with practiced ease as he checks for any bruises or injuries. Izuku stands there, completely stunned, unable to move or protest. His mind is a blur, trying to process the fact that Katsuki is checking on him, not the other way around. Kaken, Izuku whispers, his voice barely audible, but the words feel strangely heavy. Shut up, Katsuki mutters, his eyes focused intently on the area around Izuku's forearm. He's not rough, but there's an urgency to his movements. If you're hiding something and you pass out later, I'm not carrying your butt to the infirmary. Izuku's cheeks flush a deep red. This is not like Katsuki. Katsuki never cares about him this much. He's always the one doing the worrying, the one offering his strength. But tonight, everything feels flipped. Katsuki, the one who usually exudes confidence, is showing this kind of concern. Seriously, I'm okay, Izuku says softly, his voice almost pleading now, trying to assure him, even though the touch of Katsuki's hand on his arm makes him feel dizzy. Katsuki releases his arm with a grunt, stepping back as if he's done something mundane. Good. Don't make me waste my time. Izuku watches him, feeling a strange mix of emotions swirling inside him. What the hell just happened? His heart is still racing, and his thoughts are all over the place. He doesn't understand why Katsuki's actions feel so different tonight. They continue walking in silence, the weight of the unspoken words pressing down on Izuku's shoulders. He can't shake the feeling that something important just passed between them, something that goes beyond simple concern. When they reach Katsuki's room, Katsuki pauses at the door, his hand on the handle. For a long moment he doesn't open it. He just stands there, his back to Izuku, as if he's thinking about something, hesitating. Then, finally, he turns and looks at Izuku, his expression unreadable. Thanks, Katsuki says, his voice quieter now, almost reluctant. For staying with me. In the infirmary. Izuku blinks, completely thrown off. Katsuki shifts uncomfortably, his gaze dropping for a brief moment, before he looks back at Izuku. You didn't have to, but yeah. Thanks. Izuku's heart stutters in his speech. Katsuki's thanking him. With real sincerity. This is something he never expected to hear. Katsuki is usually too proud to show this kind of vulnerability. He stands there, stunned, not knowing how to respond. The words get caught in his throat, tangled in confusion and surprise. What? Katsuki snaps, his voice suddenly sharp again, as if to cover up the brief softness. Don't make it weird, nerd. Izuku flails his hands, trying to find the right words, but they're all jumbled. And no, it's not weird, he says quickly. I mean, of course I stayed. You're my friend, Kaken. Katsuki rolls his eyes, his scowl returning. Go to bed, Deku. You look like CRP. Izuku wants to protest, to tell him he's fine, but the exhaustion of the day is finally catching up with him. His body feels drained, and the weight of the emotions he's been carrying around, everything that just happened between them, leaves him speechless. With a soft, almost hesitant good night, Izuku turns and heads to his own room. Once inside, he collapses onto his bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the night replaying over and over in his mind. His heart still races, and his head is spinning from the unexpected tenderness in Katsuki's words and actions. What just happened? Izuku whispers to himself, his voice barely a breath. Katsuki doesn't thank people, not like that. He doesn't check for bruises. He doesn't care. Especially about Izuku. But tonight it was different. And even now, Izuku doesn't know what to make of it. Groaning, Izuku buries his face in his hands. What's wrong with him? But as much as he's trying to understand Katsuki's strange behavior, there's something else tugging at him. It's the way his heart wouldn't stop racing every time their eyes met, the way his 𝗧𝗔 tightened when he remembered the warmth in Katsuki's gaze. Ugh, what's wrong with me? Izuku groans, rolling over onto his side. Sleep doesn't come easily that night. The classroom hums with its usual pre-class chaos, voices overlapping in a rhythm Izuku has grown accustomed to. But today, something feels tough. It's an intangible tension, like a string pulled too tight, humming with the threat of snapping. Izuku can't pinpoint the source, but it makes his skin prickle and his thoughts wander uneasily. Sliding into his seat, Izuku tries to shake the feeling. His mind is already a tangled mess, replaying the events of last night, Katsuki's quiet concern, the way he'd muttered and complained while checking Izuku for injuries anyway. It wasn't the harshness that lingered, it was the softness underneath, raw and unguarded, that unsettled Izuku the most. Bakugo Katsuki didn't do soft. Not with him. Not with anyone. A loud thunk yanks him from his spiraling thoughts. Izuku blinks up, startled, to find Katsuki looming over him, his usual scowl fixed firmly in place. On the desk in front of him sits a bag of snacks and a chilled drink, the items arranged with a precision that seems almost deliberate. What? Izuku's voice comes out small, bewildered. Katsuki's scowl deepens, his arms crossing like a shield. You're always running on empty, idiot. If you keep skipping meals, you're gonna drop dead, and then what good are you to anyone? Just eat the DMN food. The words are sharp, clipped, but there's no real bite to them. If anything, Katsuki's posture betrays something almost uncertain. No, that couldn't be right. Bakugo Katsuki didn't do uncertainty either. Thank you, Kaken, Izuku stammers, his fingers hesitantly brushing the edge of the snack bag. The items are all things he likes, things he's never mentioned aloud. His heart gives an odd, lurching skip. Don't make it weird, Katsuki snaps, a faint blush creeping up his neck before he stomps off to his seat. Izuku stares after him, then back at the snacks, as if they might vanish under closer inspection. The thought that Katsuki had gone out of his way, for him, sends warmth blooming in his but he quickly shakes it off. It doesn't make sense. Katsuki didn't care about things like this, did he? The moment of quiet introspection doesn't last long. Good morning, Midoriya. Ida's familiar voice booms, cutting through the background chatter. His stride is purposeful as always, the picture of punctuality. Morning, Deku. Uraraka chirps as she hops onto the desk next to him, her bright smile lifting some of the tension in the room. Shudo follows close behind, his calm demeanor grounding. Izuku, he says with a slight nod. For a brief moment, everything feels normal again. Izuku relaxes under the comfort of his friend's presence, grateful for the distraction. "Good morning, everyone," he manages, his own smile returning. But the reprieve is short-lived. The single syllable slices through the air like a knife, sharp and commanding. Izuku turns just in time to see Katsuki glaring from his desk, his jaw tight. "Don't crowd him," he growls, the threat in his voice palpable. "Go sit the hell down." The cheerful atmosphere evaporates. Uraraka's eyes widen in confusion, and Ida pauses mid-adjustment of his glasses, his expression caught between indignation and bafflement. "Kaken." Izuku's voice pitches high in alarm, his hands waving as if to physically dispel the tension. "It's fine. They're just..." "Shut it, Deku," Katsuki cuts him off, his eyes never leaving the group. Shudo raises a single eyebrow, his expression calm but mildly questioning. "We'll talk later, Izuku," he says simply before retreating to his seat. Uraraka and Ida exchange uneasy glances before following, though not without a few lingering looks of concern. Izuku slumps in his chair, his face burning with embarrassment. He chances a glare at Katsuki, who pointedly avoids his gaze, his scowl set like stone. What the hell was that? The rest of the morning follows a similar pattern. Katsuki's presence looms like a storm cloud, his sharp tongue and territorial glares keeping anyone from getting too close to Izuku. Every time someone approaches, Katsuki is there, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, and an aura so menacing it's a wonder no one combusts on the spot. It's suffocating. It's confusing. But more than anything, it leaves a strange, fluttering warmth buried somewhere deep in Izuku's tea that he doesn't know how to address. By the time Kirishima bounds into the room, Izuku is a frazzled mess of nerves. "Konnichiwa," Kirishima greets, his voice full of its usual cheer as he throws an arm around Izuku's shoulders. "You good? You look. Get your hands off him." The room goes silent, all eyes snapping to Katsuki, who's halfway out of his seat, his hands planted on his desk. Kirishima freezes, his grin faltering. "What?" "You heard me," Katsuki growls, his voice low and dangerous. "Kaken." Izuku's protest is high-pitched and frantic, his hands waving wildly. "It's fine." Kirishima's always. "Shut up, Deku." Katsuki cuts him off again, his glare locked onto Kirishima like a predator sizing up prey. Kirishima raises his hands in mock surrender, stepping back with a sheepish chuckle. Chill out, man. No need to bite my head off." The tension doesn't dissipate as the room reluctantly returns to its usual chatter. Whispers flit through the air like restless insects. "What's up with Bakugo? Is he jealous or something?" Izuku sinks lower in his chair, his face burning as he buries it in his hands. When he peeks out, Katsuki is staring at him, not with anger, but with something deeper, more intense, that sends shivers down Izuku's spine. It's overwhelming. It's bewildering. But the strangest thing is how much he doesn't mind it. The cafeteria is alive with its usual chaotic energy. Trays clatter on tabletops, students laugh and chatter over the din, and the savory aroma of curry wafts through the air. Izuku walks alongside Uraraka, Ida, and Shuto, carefully balancing his tray. The noise and bustle provide a welcome distraction from the morning's bizarre events, though his mind keeps drifting back to Katsuki's odd behavior. "Today's curry smells amazing," Uraraka exclaims, leaning over her tray with an excited grin. "I concur," Ida says, his glasses catching the light as he gestures with his free hand. A balanced meal is crucial for maintaining peak physical condition. Izuku smiles faintly, trying to match their enthusiasm. He tells himself to focus on the moment, on the comforting normalcy of being with his friends. But a nagging weight lingers at the back of his mind, pulling his thoughts in another direction. As they approach their usual table, Shudo glances at Izuku with his typical calm demeanor. "You seem distracted, Izuku. Is something wrong?" Before Izuku can answer, a voice cuts through the noise like a blade. "Deku." Izuku freezes mid-step, nearly losing his grip on his tray. His head snaps toward the source of the voice, and there's Katsuki, stomping toward him with all the subtlety of an earthquake. "Kaken." Izuku stammers, his heart lurching. Katsuki doesn't stop. He grabs Izuku's wrist, firm but not painful, and begins pulling him away with single-minded determination. What are you? Izuku struggles to keep his tray steady, his feet scrambling to keep up. Oi, Bakugu! Uriarika calls, her voice rising above the cafeteria noise. What are you doing? Katsuki doesn't answer, his focus fixed ahead. The students around them part like a wave as he drags Izuku toward the far end of the cafeteria, where his own friends sit at their table. Kaken, stop. My friends, Izuku protests, glancing back at the trio they've left behind. They'll live, Katsuki growls, not breaking stride. By the time they reach the table, Izuku is out of breath and utterly bewildered. Katsuki pushes him down into a seat next to his own with a scowl that dares anyone to object. Sit the F down, Katsuki orders, dropping into the seat beside him. Izuku blinks, clutching his tray like a lifeline. But why? Eat, Katsuki snaps, his tone making it clear that the conversation is over. The table falls silent as Katsuki's friends, Kirishima, Kaminari, Mina, and Siro, stare at the two of them in stunned confusion. Kirishima is the first to break the silence, leaning forward with a nervous laugh. Bakugu, what's up, man? You're acting kinda. He glances at Izuku, searching for the right word. Intense. Shut it, shitty hair, Katsuki grumbles, his arms crossing over his His eyes flick to Izuku's tray, scanning it like he's assessing whether it meets his approval. Izuku, caught in the middle of the awkward scene, feels his cheeks heat up. It's fine, he says quickly, trying to ease the tension. I'm fine, really. Totally fine, Kaminari chimes in, his tone light and teasing. Right, Kirishima? Yeah, no problem, Kirishima says, smiling as he nudges Mina. We're all cool here. Mina rests her chin on her hand, her sharp eyes sparkling with mischief. So, Bakugu, are you gonna tell us why you abducted Midoriya? Or should we just roll with it? Mind your demon business, Pinky, Katsuki snaps, glaring at her before turning his attention back to Izuku. Izuku shrinks in his seat, staring down at his food. The atmosphere is suffocating, and he doesn't know what to do or say to make it better. The awkward silence stretches on until Mina and Kaminari, ever the mood lifters, start chatting again. Their lively banter slowly diffuses the tension, and Kirishima laughs along with them, the easy camaraderie returning to the table. Just as Izuku begins to relax, Katsuki reaches over and drops a piece of chicken onto his tray. Eat that, Katsuki says gruffly. Izuku looks at the chicken, then at Katsuki, his brow furrowing in confusion. I already have enough, Kaken. Just eat it, Katsuki interrupts, his glare daring Izuku to argue. I don't care what you need, Katsuki growls, his voice low. You're gonna eat it, nerd? Izuku's face turns bright red as the table falls silent again, all eyes on him. Thanks. Izuku says weakly, picking up the piece of chicken. He takes a small bite, his face so hot it feels like it might ignite. Katsuki grunts in satisfaction and turns back to his own tray, as if the whole thing is perfectly normal. The rest of lunch passes in a surreal haze. Izuku barely touches his food, too distracted by the weight of Katsuki's presence beside him. Every time he thinks he might relax, Katsuki pushes another piece of food onto his tray or snaps at someone for talking too loudly. By the time the bell rings, signaling the end of lunch, Izuku feels like he's run a marathon. As they stand to leave, Katsuki claps a hand on Izuku's shoulder, steering him toward the door. Let's go, he says, his tone leaving no room for argument. Izuku stumbles after him, his head spinning. Over his shoulder, he catches a glimpse of Uriarika, Ida, and Shudo watching from their table, their expressions a mix of confusion and concern. What's going on? Uriarika mouths, her brows furrowed. Izuku can only shrug helplessly as Katsuki pulls him along, leaving him more bewildered than ever. What is happening? Izuku thinks, his CC tight and his thoughts a jumble. And, to his growing frustration, another thought bubbles up before he can push it away. Why does part of me not want it to stop? By the time the final class of the day ends, Izuku feels like he's been through the ringer. Katsuki has shadowed him relentlessly, dragging him from one place to another with an intensity that borders on obsession. Every time Izuku tried to slip away, Katsuki was there, his crimson eyes daring him to try harder. Whether it was forcing them to sit together in class, hovering over his shoulder in the hallway, or commandeering lunch, Katsuki seemed unwilling to let Izuku out of his sight. The worst part was the silence. Katsuki offered no explanation, only sharp glares and gruff commands, leaving Izuku's mind spinning with questions. As the final bell rings, Izuku wastes no time. Gripping the straps of his backpack tightly, he slips out of the classroom while Katsuki is distracted talking to Kirishima. His heart as he weaves through the crowded hallway, keeping his head low. Just a few minutes of peace, he tells himself, glancing over his shoulder. The hallway seems endless as he darts around a corner, finally reaching the lounge. Relief floods him when he spots Uraraka, Ida, and Shuto sitting around a table. "Deku," Uraraka calls, waving him over with a grin. "Finally. We've barely seen you all day." Izuku drops into a chair beside her, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Are you okay?" Ida asks, his glasses catching the light as he leans forward. "Look, frazzled." "I'm fine," Izuku says quickly, though his voice lacks conviction. Uraraka narrows her eyes at him. "Okay, but seriously, what's up with Bakugo? He's been glued to you all day. Did you two have some kind of bet or—" "No. Nothing like that." Izuku interrupts, his face turning red. "I think he's just worried because of yesterday." "Worried?" Ida repeats, skepticism dripping from the word. With all due respect, Midoriya, Bakugo's concern usually manifests as yelling. This is different. Uraraka nods, resting her chin on her hand. "Yeah, it's like he's turned into some kind of guard dog. A really angry one." "Possessive," Shuto says flatly, his mismatched eyes cutting through the conversation. "It's not just worry. He's glaring at anyone who gets too close to you. That's not normal." Izuku freezes, his hands clenching his knees. "Kaken's always been intense," he says, though even he doesn't believe the excuse. "Sure, but this is next-level intense," Uraraka presses. "Like, he basically bit Kirishima's head off earlier. I thought they were best buds." "Indeed," Ida agrees, his voice laced with concern. "Bakugo's behavior is uncharacteristically overbearing. Are you certain nothing is wrong?" Izuku lets out a shaky sigh, slumping in his chair. "I don't know. He's been acting weird, but maybe it's just his way of processing what happened yesterday." Shuto tilts his head slightly. "Or it's the villain's quirk." The room goes quiet. Izuku's eyes widen. "You think the quirk affected him?" Shuto nods, his expression calm but serious. "It's possible. The timing matches. Whatever that villain hit him with might have amplified his protective instincts, or warped them entirely." Ida adjusts his glasses, his expression grave. "If that's true, it could be dangerous to leave it unchecked. We should consult Recovery Girl immediately." "I should talk to him," Izuku says softly, his green eyes flicking to his friends. "If something's wrong, he won't admit it unless I push him." Uraraka's brows knit together. "Are you sure that's a good idea? He's been so intense. What if he lashes out?" Izuku hesitates but nods. "I'll be careful. But I can't ignore this." The others exchange uncertain glances. "Be cautious," Ida warns, his voice firm. "If Bakugo's behavior is influenced by a quirk, his reactions might be volatile." Izuku opens his mouth to respond, but the words die in his throat as a familiar sound reaches his ears. Heavy footsteps echo down the hallway, growing louder with every second. His stomach drops. "No way. How did he find me?" Shuto's head tilts slightly toward the sound. "Did you tell him you were coming here?" "No." Izuku whispers frantically, already half standing. "I didn't think." The door swings open with a deafening bang, cutting him off. Katsuki stands in the doorway, his crimson eyes zeroed in on Izuku with unrelenting intensity. His jaw is tight, his hands shoved into his pockets, but the tension radiating from him is impossible to ignore. "Deku," he growls, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell are you doing here?" Izuku feels frozen, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Kaken. You ran off just to hang out with these extras?" Katsuki spits, his gaze flicking disdainfully to Uraraka, Ida, and Shoto. "What the hell, Deku? You're supposed to stay by my side." The room falls deathly silent. Uraraka's jaw drops. Ida adjusts his glasses in stunned disbelief. Even Shudo's usually stoic expression flickers with surprise. Kaken, what are you talking about? Izuku stammers, his voice barely above a whisper. Katsuki steps further into the room, his frustration crackling like static in the air. Don't play dumb. You're supposed to stick with me. What part of that don't you get? Izuku gapes at him, unable to process the words. His friends exchange uneasy glances, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. Bakugo, Shudo says evenly, breaking the silence, you're not acting like yourself. Did something happen after the fight yesterday? Katsuki snaps his glare to Shudo, bristling like a cornered animal. Shut the hell up, icy hot. This doesn't concern you. The air seems to crackle as the confrontation escalates. Kaken, stop. Izuku finally finds his voice, stepping forward. I'm fine. You don't have to, but Katsuki cuts him off, his voice sharp. But you don't get it, Deku. You don't understand. The door behind Katsuki slams shut, the sound reverberating like a gunshot, locking them all inside. Izuku's breath catches as Katsuki turns back to him, the intensity in his eyes leaving no room for escape. The lounge is unnervingly still, despite the presence of 5 of UA's most prominent students. A strange heaviness hangs in the air, as though the room itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to break the tension. The soft hum of the air conditioning offers little comfort. It's the kind of silence that presses against your skin, thick and suffocating, a palpable reminder of the discomfort that lingers between them. Izuku can feel it weighing on him, and he knows he's not the only one. His friends are all here, Katsuki, Shudo, Ida, and Uraraka, but no one seems to know what to say next. Izuku's gaze flicks across the room, first to his friends, still visibly shaken by what's been going on with Katsuki, and then to the explosive blonde himself. Katsuki stands at the far end of the room, arms crossed, his usual scowl firmly in place, but there's something about his posture that feels off, rigid, unyielding. The tension radiates from him in waves. Izuku can't help but feel his heart race a little faster. His mind keeps circling around the same thought. Something is wrong with Katsuki. Finally, unable to stand the silence any longer, Izuku speaks up, his voice soft and tentative, as if each word might shatter the fragile calm. Maybe we should go see Recovery Girl? He hesitates, then adds quickly, she could do a more thorough diagnosis. Maybe they can finally figure out what's wrong with you. The suggestion lingers in the air, but Katsuki's reaction is immediate. His eyes narrow sharply, and for a split second, Izuku feels a flicker of fear shoot through him. What the hell's wrong with you? Katsuki growls, his voice thick with irritation. There's nothing wrong with me. You're all just overreacting like a bunch of idiots. Izuku opens his mouth to protest, but Katsuki doesn't give him a chance. And you're not going anywhere with them, he continues, his voice suddenly low and dangerous. You're staying with me. I don't care what the hell they think. Izuku freezes. His breath catches in his throat as he looks at Katsuki, confusion clouding his thoughts. Kaken, you, stop talking, Deku, Katsuki snaps, his tone cutting through the room like a knife. His gaze shifts toward the others, darkening with something that could only be described as possessiveness. None of you know 𝗧𝗓𝗔 about this. You don't get to take him away from me. Ida, always the voice of reason, straightens his back, his eyes filled with concern. But, Bakugo, you're not acting like yourself. We can't just let you take Midoriya without knowing what's going on. Yeah, Uraraka chimes in, her voice laced with worry. You've been acting really weird lately. Are you sure you're okay? Katsuki's glare intensifies, his fists clenched at his sides, and the room falls into an unnerving silence. His body trembles with barely contained rage, and his voice, when it comes, is a low growl that sends a shiver down Izuku's spine. I've been with Deku longer than any of you Demon Extras, he seethes, his words thick with frustration. We've been through more 𝗧𝗓𝗔 than you can even imagine. I've earned the right to be by his side, not you. Izuku's heart stutters in his 𝗧𝗓𝗔, not sure how to respond to that. He can feel his breath catch, his mind racing to make sense of it all. It's not the first time Katsuki has acted so intense, but this feels different. Something is off, something deeper, and Izuku doesn't know how to untangle it. It's not a competition, Kaken, Izuku says softly, trying to defuse the situation, but his words barely reach Katsuki. It is a competition, Katsuki barks, his eyes flashing with frustration and something else Izuku can't quite name. Your mind deaf. You always have been. The words hit like a slap, echoing in the stillness, and for a moment, no one knows what to do. The air is thick with the weight of Katsuki's confession, and Izuku feels his entire body freeze. This isn't the Katsuki he knows. The brash, hot-headed boy from his childhood. But this feels wrong. His throat tightens as he opens his mouth to speak, but instead of the words he intended, a soft, trembling question slips from his lips, one he's not sure he's ready to ask. Kaken, what do you mean by that? Katsuki's expression falters for a split second, his gaze softening, but it's gone in an instant, replaced with an unrelenting hardness. He takes a sharp breath, his ET rising and falling with the weight of what he's about to say. I'm in love with you. Katsuki spits, as though it should be the most obvious thing in the world. It should be obvious, so just come with me already. The words hang in the air, jagged and sharp, slicing through the tense silence. Izuku stands frozen, his heart in his tea, unable to process what just happened. Katsuki, his childhood friend, the one who had always been brash, abrasive, and fiercely independent, in love with him. It doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. The others are equally motionless, their gazes flicking between one another, unsure how to respond. The room is so still it feels as though the world outside has stopped turning. But it's Katsuki's gaze that keeps Izuku rooted to the spot. His eyes, filled with frustration, and yet, beneath the anger, something softer, something more vulnerable. Izuku can see it. He can feel it. And it terrifies him. Shudo steps forward, his voice calm and measured as always. This has to be some kind of quirk manipulation, he suggests, his tone thoughtful but firm. Bakugo, you're under the illusion that you love Izuku because of the effect of the quirk that hit you, but it's not real. Katsuki's fury is immediate, his body tense, hands clenched into fists so tightly his knuckles go white. You don't know anything, Biki, he growls, his voice dripping with venom. Don't say SHT about something you don't understand. Shudo stands his ground, his expression unwavering. I know you're not yourself right now, Bakugo, he replies, calm and collected. And I'm not going to let you hurt Izuku. Katsuki takes a step forward, his body radiating tension, eyes flashing with something dark. You got a problem with me, I see hot. Do you have feelings for Deku? Wanna fight me or something? His voice is low and dangerous, a growl beneath every word. If you do, we can settle it outside. I'll knock that pretty boy attitude out of you in no time. Shudo's eyes never leave Katsuki's, his expression neutral, though his voice is firm. I don't have romantic feelings for Izuku, he replies, his voice calm, but there's a hardness to it now. But I won't let you near him while you're in this state. Before anyone can react, Katsuki lunges forward, the air between them charged with violence. The two collide with a force that seems to shake the room, punches flying, grunts of exertion filling the air. The crackle of their quirks clashes in the tense space, sending a shockwave of energy through the room. Izuku is momentarily stunned by the explosion of motion, but his instincts kick in. He rushes toward them, grabbing onto Katsuki's arm with all his strength, trying to pull him away. Kaken, stop. Ida is quick to act, reaching Shudo and pulling him back, his voice booming with authority. Enough. Izuku's grip tightens on Katsuki's wrist, but Katsuki resists, pushing forward, eyes wild with fury. Upon noticing Izuku's touch, however, he's suddenly distracted from the urge to fight, his fingers clamping down on Izuku's arm, the pressure almost painful, but Izuku doesn't pull away. I'm not letting go, Katsuki growls, his body rigid with tension. He pulls Izuku closer, like a shield, as though keeping him away from Shudo is the only thing that matters. Izuku's heart races, and he can feel the heat of Katsuki's breath against his skin. His own pulse is erratic, a storm of emotions swirling inside him. "Kaken, you need to calm down," Izuku pleads, his voice shaky. "This isn't you. You're being affected by the quirk. We can talk about this. Please." Katsuki growls in frustration, but there's a flicker of something softer beneath the anger, something that confuses Izuku even more. "I'm not being affected by some weak extra's quirk, 𝗵𝗵𝗲 𝗕𝗶𝗍𝗍," he mutters, shaking his head as though trying to clear it. "I love you, 𝗧𝗏. Why can you just believe me?" Izuku can't help but ache at his words. His heart tightens in his 𝗧𝗓, a lump forming in his throat as he tries to remain calm. "We should check anyway," he says quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "Just to make sure." Katsuki grumbles, clearly reluctant, but his posture eases just slightly, enough for Izuku to sense the tiniest crack in the wall he's built around himself. "Fine," Katsuki mutters, his voice low. "We'll go check with recovery girl, but don't you doubt me, Deku. When she confirms there's nothing wrong with me, you better stop questioning me." Izuku swallows strong, the pain of knowing that Katsuki truly believes his feelings are real stinging deeper than he expected. "Okay," he whispers, nodding, though the words feel heavier than they should. "Let's go." The walk to the infirmary feels like an eternity. Each step they take is weighed down by the unsaid things hanging between them, the pressure thick and suffocating. Katsuki's grip on Izuku's arm is unyielding, possessive, his fingers digging into the soft fabric of Izuku's jacket as if he's afraid someone might snatch him away at any moment. Every time Izuku tries to breathe through the tension, he catches a glimpse of his friends, Shuto, Ida, and Uraraka, following silently behind them, their faces a mixture of concern, confusion, and frustration. There's an unspoken agreement among them to say nothing, to do nothing that might provoke Katsuki further. None of them have seen him like this before, this raw, desperate energy crackling in his every movement. His eyes burn with a kind of fury that Izuku knows all too well, but it's different now. It's distorted, like something inside Katsuki is clawing to be set free, something that has probably never been there but is now spilling out uncontrollably. Izuku feels his 𝗧𝗓 tighten with 1,000 conflicting emotions. He keeps glancing at Katsuki, watching the storm brewing in his expression. His face set in an angry scowl, his body tense with barely contained frustration, every muscle coiled as if ready to explode. Katsuki's gaze is locked straight ahead, his jaw clenched so tightly that it might break, and Izuku can feel the weight of that anger pressing on him from every side. It's like walking on the edge of a cliff, every step precarious, every moment an agonizing wait for something to give way. "I'm not going anywhere, Deku. And there's nothing wrong with me," Katsuki mutters under his breath, the words low and sharp. It's as if he's trying to keep the world at bay, trying to block out anything that might threaten the fragile hold he has on Izuku. "So don't look at me like that." Izuku swallows, the lump in his throat growing heavier by the second. He takes a steadying breath, trying to calm the storm. Inside himself, "I'm not looking at you any differently, Kaken," he says, his voice softer than he intends, tinged with an ache that won't go away. I don't know what's happening. I just want to help you." Katsuki scoffs, a harsh sound that cuts through the air, and Izuku feels his grip tighten around his arm, just enough to send a jolt through him. It's as if Katsuki is trying to reassure himself that Izuku is still there, that he hasn't gone anywhere despite everything. "I don't need help from anyone," Katsuki spits, his words dripping with disdain. "Especially not from those DMN extras." Izuku aches at the words, but he doesn't pull away. He keeps his gaze forward, trying to ignore the heavy silence between them. Shuto's sharp eyes flick to the side, but he remains quiet, ever the observant one, his expression unreadable. Ida, on the other hand, is muttering under his breath, likely trying to prepare some speech to ease the tension, but it's clear that none of them know what to say. None of them know how to break through the wall Katsuki has built around himself. As they reach the infirmary, the door swings open with a soft creak, and Recovery Girl is waiting for them, her tired but kind eyes scanning over the group. Her expression shifts when she sees Katsuki, lingering on him for just a moment longer than necessary. "Midoriya," she greets them, her voice warm but laced with concern. "What brings you here today? Did you notice anything about the quirk?" Izuku hesitates, the words suddenly feeling too big in his mouth. He looks at Katsuki, who is staring at the floor, his entire body rigid with resistance. Katsuki doesn't want to be here. He doesn't want anyone questioning him, doesn't want to face the truth that Izuku can feel pressing down on them both. Kaken's been acting different, Izuku says slowly, his voice careful, almost as if he's walking on glass. We think it might be, maybe a love quirk or something that's affecting him. Recovery girl raises an eyebrow, her gaze softening but her attention sharp, as though she's already seen this before. She gestures for Katsuki to sit on one of the beds, her movements measured and calm. Is that so, she says, her voice gentle but with an edge of authority. Let's take a look, then. I'll have my apprentice scan you again for traces of the quirk. Katsuki grits his teeth but doesn't protest. His posture is a clear message. He's not happy about this, but he's not going to show any more weakness by fighting it. He sits down on the bed, arms crossed tightly over his his fists clenched so strong his knuckles are white. He looks like a caged animal, ready to snap at any moment. Izuku watches him closely, his heart aching as he takes in the way Katsuki's entire body radiates discomfort. He's trying so strong to hold onto that familiar hardness, the anger that has always been his shield. But underneath, Izuku can see the cracks, see how fragile he really is. Katsuki is still his Kaken, the same boy he's known for years, but right now he's struggling to hold onto something that isn't even real. The apprentice begins the scan, and the room falls into an oppressive silence, the only sound the quiet hum of the equipment. Katsuki doesn't speak, his gaze fixed on the floor, his entire body tense. Izuku doesn't know what to say either. Every word feels like it would be a betrayal to the rawness of the moment. It's clear that something is wrong, something far beyond their understanding, but Katsuki isn't ready to hear that yet. Finally, the apprentice looks up, eyes wide with confirmation. It's definitely a love quirk, she says, her voice serious, almost clinical. It's been embedded into his system, and it's clear it's making him act, well, out of character. Recovery girl sighs softly, turning to Izuku with a look that's equal parts knowing and sorrowful. We've seen this before, she says, her voice low but steady. It's a dangerous quirk, one that can cloud someone's judgment, especially when it comes to feelings of attachment and affection. This is something that needs to be corrected, but it won't be easy. She glances at Katsuki, who still hasn't moved, his head hung low in denial. We'll notify the pros who are tracking down the villain responsible. Once they find her, we'll bring her here to reverse the quirk. Izuku nods, trying to hold back the wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm him. Thank you. I just want Kaken to be okay. The words feel empty as they leave his mouth, a hollow plea that seems to echo in the space between them. What if Katsuki isn't okay? What if this isn't just a simple quirk? What if it's something deeper, something irreversible? Before he can voice any of these fears, Katsuki's head snaps up. His eyes, once filled with a burning fury, now flash with something more dangerous, desperation. You're all lying, he shouts, his voice raw with emotion. You think you know me? His feet P&D against the floor as he stands, his body trembling with barely contained rage. He steps forward, closing the distance between them, his face inches from Izuku's. My feelings are real, Deku, he spits, his breath hot against Izuku's skin. I don't need you or anyone else deciding what's real or not for me. Izuku recoils instinctively, but he doesn't step back. He meets Katsuki's gaze, holding it even as his heart races in his no. Katsuki's voice cracks, his anger spilling over, but there's something else there now, something vulnerable. He shakes his head, his words faltering as they spill out. You don't get it. His hands tremble at his sides as he looks at Izuku, eyes raw and wide with something more than just rage. I've always felt this way. I've always. He pauses, as though the weight of his confession is too much for him to bear, his voice breaking. I've always loved you, Deku. Can't you see that? I'm not lying to you. Izuku's heart stutters, a jagged pain cutting through his Kaken? His voice is barely a whisper, but it carries the weight of everything he's feeling in that moment. His feels tight, his throat constricted as though the very air is being squeezed from his lungs. He wants to believe him, wants to believe that this is real, that Katsuki's feelings aren't just the result of some quirk. But the truth lingers, cold and unyielding. I know you think that. I know you feel that way right now, but it's the quirk. It's not, it's real. Katsuki's voice rises, and he grabs Izuku's arm, pulling him closer, his grip fierce and desperate. His eyes are wild, pupils dilated, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I'm the one who decides what's real, not you. Not any of them. So stop telling me that I don't know how I feel. Izuku closes his eyes, the weight of his words crushing him. His own breath is shaky, his pulse erratic as he feels the ache of everything he's ever wanted hanging in the air between them. Kaken, I know you would know how you feel best, he whispers, voice barely audible over the in his ears. But this isn't you. This isn't real. This isn't how it's supposed to be. Tears sting at the back of his eyes as he struggles to hold onto his own truth. The words feel like a betrayal, but they are the only thing he can say. The dream of Katsuki loving him is so close, so agonizingly close, but it's not real, and that is the cruelest truth of all. The tension in the room is thick, almost tangible, like the air itself is being suffocated by the pressure of unsaid words. And uncertain emotions. Katsuki has not let go of Izuku's arm since they received the confirmation about the love quirk, and every inch of his presence is a heavy, looming weight. No one dares to break the silence, the atmosphere too fragile for even a whisper. The room hums with the static of urgency, the phone call with Izuku still reverberating in the air, each second stretching into an eternity. Recovery girl stands off to the side, arms crossed, her gaze calm but sharp, as though calculating the exact moment when the situation will spiral beyond anyone's control. Izuku can feel Katsuki's touch like a burn, the constant pressure of his grip tightening whenever anyone moves too close. Every flicker of movement, whether it's the subtle twitch of Katsuki's fingers or the shift of his body, feels like an unspoken warning. He's trapped in this strange, inescapable space between knowing he has to help and knowing how dangerous this situation could become. Midoriya, Izuku's voice crackles through the phone, the urgency in his tone unmistakable even through the static. We need to try something. I'll come by and attempt to nullify the quirk. If it works, we might be able to resolve this quickly. Izuku nods, despite knowing that Izuku can't see him. Okay, please hurry, sensei. The phone call ends with a faint click, the buzz of the line cutting off abruptly, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. And then, the room falls back into the weight of uncertainty, broken only by Katsuki's quiet, restless shifting beside him. Every time Izuku glances at him, he sees the strain in Katsuki's posture, the tension in his shoulders, the flickering rage in his eyes. He's holding on to something fragile and broken, and Izuku is unsure if it's the quirk or something deeper. Shuto, Ida, and Uraraka are still standing there, watching quietly, their eyes flicking to Izuku as if searching for answers in him, as though expecting him to know what comes next. Izuku feels the pressure building within him, the weight of their expectations crushing down on him. What is he supposed to do? How is he supposed to fix something this complex, when the one thing he's sure of is that he doesn't fully understand what's happening? When Izuku finally arrives, his presence brings a sense of purposeful calm, though the tension doesn't dissipate. He moves through the room with his usual quiet efficiency, rolling the sleeves of his uniform up as he stands before Katsuki. Izuku's eyes meet Izuku's for a moment. Silent understanding passes between them, a shared hope that this might work. Izuku has to believe it will, even though the doubt gnaws at him, even though the fear coils tight in his because Izuku's voice is steady, but there's an underlying edge of caution. I'm going to attempt to nullify the quirk. You need to stay calm for this to work. Katsuki's gaze sharpens, the familiar scowl deepening as he tightens his grip on Izuku's arm. His voice is a low growl, the frustration and weariness in his tone unmistakable. I don't need your help, he spits, though the venom in his words is weak, undercut by an exhaustion that has settled in deep. His jaw is tight, his hands trembling slightly around Izuku's arm. Izuku's eyes narrow, but he doesn't back down. He steps forward, his quirk activating with a soft rustle of air, the same careful focus in his movements as always. He reaches out toward Katsuki, his hand poised just in front of him, and the room falls silent, the only sound the sharp intake of breath from the group waiting for something, anything, to happen. But nothing changes. Aizawa's quirk fails, the soft hum of his power fading without effect. The air in the room grows thicker, heavier, suffocating with the unspoken reality that this isn't going to be fixed so easily. Katsuki's grip on Izuku's arm tightens painfully, and Izuku can feel the raw frustration pulsing through him. It's clear now, this quirk, this love quirk, is not going away anytime soon. In it, Aizawa mutters under his breath, his brows furrowing in frustration. He steps back, glancing briefly at Izuku before his gaze shifts to the others. This isn't working. Whatever's going on with Bakugo, it's not something that can be solved right now with just my quirk. We need to take a different approach. Izuku's heart sinks into his stomach at the words. His mind races, but the terror bubbling inside him keeps him rooted to the spot. What could they do now? If Aizawa's quirk can't handle it, then what are they left with? Are they really supposed to just wait for the villain to get caught while Katsuki is forced to deal with these feelings he definitely doesn't want? Recovery Girl breaks the silence, her voice sharp but measured. Aizawa, perhaps it's time we consider separating them, for safety of course. The suggestion hits Izuku like a punch to the gut, his stomach dropping at the thought. He instinctively turns to look at Katsuki, only to find him already staring at Recovery Girl, his entire body coiled with rage. The fire in his eyes burns hotter now, his fists clenching, and Izuku feels his arm being crushed in Katsuki's grip as he snarls. I'm not going anywhere without Deku. Katsuki roars, his voice full of fury and desperation. You want to try and stop me? Go ahead. Let's see if you can handle me. The room freezes. Time seems to halt as Katsuki's words hang in the air, the intensity of his threat vibrating in the silence that follows. Izuku's heart hammers in his 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗲, the fear rushing through him like a tidal wave, drowning out everything else. Katsuki's anger is familiar, but there's something darker now, something twisted by the quirk, a fear so deep it warps into this uncontrollable need to hold on. Izuku feels a cold shiver run down his spine, and for a moment, he wonders if he might be witnessing something irreversible. Bakugo, Aizawa's voice is low, but there's no mistaking the authority in it. His body is coiled, prepared to act if necessary. You need to understand. You're not in control right now. You need to calm down. Katsuki's shout cuts through the room like a knife. I'm not letting you separate me from Deku. Not for a second. You think I'm gonna just sit here and let you take him away from me? Izuku watches, his 𝗧𝗔𝗍 tightening with helplessness as he sees the wild desperation in Katsuki's eyes. The quirk is warping him, twisting his emotions into something frantic, something irrational. But under it all, Izuku knows that this is still Katsuki, the same person who stood beside him for years. And yet, right now, the situation is too unstable for him to break through. Ida steps forward, trying to intervene, his voice calm but firm. Bakugo, you need to listen to reason. But before Ida can finish, Katsuki around, his face a mask of fury. You stay the hell out of this, for eyes, he snarls, his voice thick with venom. Shuto, ever the observer, remains calm but wary. His eyes flick from Izuku to Katsuki, his expression guarded. Izuku, he says softly, his voice full of concern, this isn't something any of us can fix. If Bakugo can't be separated from you, then you're the one who has to deal with him. You need to make the decision. We can't do it for you. Izuku swallows strong, the weight of their eyes on him like a physical force. The room feels like it's closing in, the air so thick it's strong to breathe. He looks at Katsuki, whose gaze is still locked onto him, burning with a mixture of fear and desperation. His heart aches as he sees the raw, unguarded emotion in those eyes, and he knows this is something he has to face, something only he can handle. Kaken, Izuku says softly, his voice trembling with the weight of everything unsaid. You have to understand, they're only trying to help. This quirk, it's not you. It's controlling you. How do you feel about being separated? It might help, so you won't do or say things you'll regret. Do you think you'll be okay with that? Or do you want me to stay? Katsuki's breathing is shallow, the tension in his body like a taut string, ready to snap. His grip tightens, and the restlessness in him only intensifies. Of course I don't want to be separated from you, he growls, his voice raw, lacking its usual strength. I'm not weak enough to let them take you away from me. Izuku hesitates, his gaze flicking to Aizawa, who stands silently, waiting for him to make the choice. He knows there is no easy answer, no perfect solution. If he says no, if he agrees to be separated, it could shatter whatever fragile hold Katsuki has left. But if he says yes, if he stays, he's risking everything. He doesn't know if it's the right decision, but it feels like the only one. I'll stay with him, Izuku says quietly, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. If it helps keep him calm, then I'll stay with him. Aizawa sighs, his gaze unreadable but sharp. I'm not happy about this, but I can't force him to be separated from you. Not when he's this unstable. We'll make sure the pros assigned to this case track down the villain and get this resolved as quickly as possible. Izuku nods, his heart heavy with the weight of his decision. He turns to Katsuki, whose gaze softens just slightly, the hardness in his eyes giving way to something else. A flicker of relief, quiet but unmistakable. Thanks, Deku, Katsuki mutters, his voice quieter than usual, though the intensity is still there. I knew you'd get it. Izuku smiles gently, though the sadness in his expression remains. I always get you, Kaken. I'll stay, as long as you want me to stay. As the room settles into a tense silence, the weight of their decision hangs in the air, and Izuku can only hope, pray, that this choice won't break them both. The classroom hums with its usual morning chaos, a symphony of laughter, chatter, and the occasional clatter of books. For Izuku, though, it feels as if all that noise narrows into a single, suffocating spotlight. The air is heavy with stolen glances, hushed whispers, and pointed stares, all aimed at him. Or more precisely, at the blonde currently latched onto him like a barnacle. Kaken, Izuku hisses, voice trembling between frustration and panic. His green eyes dart around the room, catching a few classmates quickly averting their gazes. You're too close. Everyone's staring. Katsuki doesn't so much as flinch. If anything, he leans in further, the solid line of his shoulder pressing against Izuku's. The warmth radiating off him feels almost scorching, as if Katsuki's sheer presence is enough to set Izuku's nerves ablaze. Let him stare, Katsuki says, his voice carrying the same smug defiance that's followed him since 𝗵𝗲𝗏. His red eyes sweep the room like a predator daring someone, anyone, to comment. Not like it's some big F in secret. Izuku's stomach twists. Not a secret. What does he even mean by that? His throat tightens around the protest forming on his tongue, silenced further when Katsuki's hand, calloused, firm, and far too casual, reaches for his own, intertwining their fingers together. The touch is searing, as though Katsuki's very skin holds the weight of every unspoken word Izuku can't bring himself to say. Relax, Deku, Katsuki mutters, his voice dropping an octave, softer now, almost endemic. The tone sends an unwelcome shiver down Izuku's spine. I'm just keeping you safe. Safe from what? Izuku whispers, his voice cracking as he pulls his hand back, or at least tries to. Katsuki's grip is gentle, but unyielding. Izuku feels the heat rising to his cheeks, an inevitable betrayal of his spiraling thoughts. Before he can wrestle free or make sense of Katsuki's strange behavior, a sharp, gleeful voice cuts through the air. Midoriya. Mina's sing-song tone practically sparkles with mischief as she bounds over, her pink eyes gleaming with unrestrained curiosity. What's this? You and Bakugo, together. Why didn't you tell us? The classroom's energy shifts in an instant, the hum of background chatter replaced by a tidal wave of gasps, murmurs, and pointed exclamations. Todoroki, did you know about this? Wait, is that why they've been so close lately? No way Bakugo's the lovey-dovey type. Look at him. He's literally hanging off Midoriya. Izuku's entire body stiffens. He's sure his soul is seconds away from escaping through the nearest window. Katsuki, on the other hand, looks utterly unbothered. Right, we're together, Katsuki declares, finally letting go of Izuku's hand in favor of throwing an arm over the back of Izuku's chair like he owns not just the desk, but the entire room. What? You think I'd let anyone else have Deku? He's mine. If Izuku's face was warm before, it's practically molten now. 𝗧𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗃, he sputters, his voice rising in pitch as he flails helplessly. His wide-eyed panic only seems to fuel Katsuki's grin, which has morphed into a full-blown wolfish smirk. Mina gasps dramatically, clutching her 𝗧𝗔𝗂𝘁𝗵𝗃 like Katsuki's words have physically struck her. Oh my god, Bakugo, that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. How long has this been going on? Was it a secret? Who confessed first? Tell me everything. Hold up. 𝗵𝗃 interjects, sliding into view with an equally ridiculous grin. Bakugo, spill. When did you know you were in love with Midoriya? Katsuki doesn't even blink. Since the first day I saw him, he says with a confidence that sends the entire room into a stunned silence. The collective gasp that follows is loud enough to rival an explosion. Mina actually squeals, grabbing Zero by the arm and shaking him like a rag doll. Can you believe this? Secretly pining all this time. I knew there was something going on. Izuku feels like he's living a nightmare. That's not, he starts, but his voice falters when Katsuki turns to him, his expression shifting from smug to something almost tender. You don't have to be embarrassed, Deku, Katsuki says, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. The tone catches Izuku off guard, making his breath hitch. I get it, it's weird being this open about us. But you're worth it. And you promised yesterday, didn't you? You said you'd stay by my side as long as I want you to. And I want you to stay forever. So we don't have to hide it anymore, you hear me? Who gives a sh what these extras think? Izuku's heart's so strong it might as well burst through his 𝗧𝗓𝗏. What is he even talking about? When exactly did they start dating? He casts a desperate glance toward his friends, Shuto, Uraraka, and Iida, but they look just as bewildered as he feels. Iida clears his throat, his voice cutting through the chaos. Bakugo, he says, adjusting his glasses, perhaps you should exercise some discretion while we're in class. Personal matters should remain. Shut it, for eyes, Katsuki snaps, though the usual venom is absent. What, you think I'm ashamed? Like hell I'm gonna pretend I don't love Deku just 'cause we're in school. Screw that. The room explodes. Mina is practically in tears over. The romantic confession of the century. 𝗵𝗃 is pelting Katsuki with increasingly invasive questions. Even Kirishima, ever the supportive friend, joins in with a laugh, declaring them UA's ultimate power couple. Meanwhile, Izuku is barely keeping it together. He knows the truth. This is all because of a love quirk Katsuki was hit with. But the longer this continues, the harder it is to separate Katsuki's usual brash honesty from whatever the quirk is making him say. The way Katsuki looks at him, the warmth in his voice, the conviction in his words, it all feels too real. But it can't be real. Right? Izuku sneaks another glance at Katsuki, who's now arguing with 𝗵𝗃 about why Izuku is objectively the most amazing person in their class. Katsuki's words are loud, confident, and unyielding. Izuku exhales shakily, burying his burning face in his hands. It's only been 2 days and the quirk's effects are already spiraling out of control. How much longer can he keep up this charade before everything falls apart? The hallway buzzes with its usual lunchtime chaos, students chatting, lockers slamming shut, and shoes squeaking against the polished floor. But to Izuku, it all feels muted under the weight of his current predicament. Katsuki's hand grips his own tightly, their fingers intertwined in a way that feels far too intimate for the crowded corridor. It's not just the contact that has his heart, it's the sheer confidence radiating off Katsuki, like holding hands in public is as natural as breathing. Izuku's face burns as he catches the curious glances from passing students, some subtle, others far too blatant. Murmurs ripple through the crowd, fragments of whispered conversations reaching his ears. Are they holding hands? No way, Bakugo and Midoriya. Since when were they? His 𝗧𝗓𝗏 tightens, his mind racing as he scrambles for a way to diffuse the situation. His eyes dart toward their friends trailing a few steps behind. Uraraka covers her mouth with both hands, clearly holding back a laugh, while 𝗧𝗏 looks completely unfazed, though his gaze lingers on them a little longer than usual. Iida, predictably, looks on with a mixture of concern and barely concealed disapproval. Kaken, Izuku whispers, his voice strained and nervous. He tugs at their joined hands, though he doesn't put much force behind it. We don't have to, do this here. Everyone's looking. Don't even start, Katsuki snaps, his voice low but firm. It lacks its usual sharpness, though, and when he stops abruptly in the middle of the hallway, Izuku realizes something's off. Katsuki turns to face him fully, his expression a complex mix of frustration and hurt. His crimson eyes narrow but not in anger, in something almost like vulnerability. What? You embarrassed to be with me, Deku. The words hit Izuku like a slap. His throat tightens and panic flares in his... No, it's not that, he stammers, his words tripping over themselves. There are a lot of people and I get nervous, that's all. Katsuki's eyes search his face, and for a moment, the hallway noise fades entirely. The grip on Izuku's hand tightens slightly, the faint crackle of Katsuki's quirks sparking in the air between them. What the hell's there to be nervous about? Katsuki demands, his voice rising just enough to draw even more attention their way. His free hand ball into a fist at his side. If anyone's got a problem, they can say it to my face, and I'll blow their DMN teeth in. Kaken. Izuku yelps, his voice going high-pitched as he glances around nervously. Several students have stopped walking entirely, their attention locked on the scene unfolding before them. It's not about them. He lowers his voice, leaning in slightly as if that will help. I'm shy. That's all it is. For a long moment, Katsuki just stares at him, his brows furrowing as though he's trying to process the words. Then, to Izuku's utter shock, Katsuki's scowl softens. A slow, almost mischievous grin spreads across his face, and he steps closer, their faces now inches apart. Shy. Katsuki murmurs, his voice dropping into something low and teasing. The proximity sends a jolt through Izuku, his breath catching. You don't need to worry about those extras, Deku. If anyone says SHT about us, I'll F them up. No one gets to mess with my boyfriend. The word boyfriend hits Izuku like a freight train, and he's certain his face is now as red as Katsuki's eyes. He tries to laugh it off, but it comes out more like a strangled squeak. Alright, he mutters, too flustered to form an actual sentence. His gaze flickers to their friends again. Uraraka looks seconds away from bursting into laughter, her cheeks puffed out as she struggles to contain herself. 𝗧𝗏 watches the exchange with his usual calm, though his head tilts slightly, a hint of curiosity breaking through his stoic mask. And Iida, poor Iida, is adjusting his glasses so vigorously it's a miracle they don't snap in half. Kaken, let's just go eat, Izuku mumbles, tugging at Katsuki's hand again. This time, Katsuki relents, letting out an exaggerated huff as he turns and continues walking, dragging Izuku along like it's his mission to make sure they reach the cafeteria together. Izuku can still feel the weight of dozens of eyes on them, but Katsuki's grip doesn't waver. If anything, it feels grounding, steady, firm, reassuring. He hates himself for it, but there's a small, selfish part of him that doesn't entirely mind. It's ridiculous, he knows. Katsuki's only acting like this because of the love quirk. None of it is real. And yet, Izuku can't help but wonder. Is this what it would feel like if it were? He risks a glance at Katsuki, whose face is set in a scowl that somehow manages to look more protective than angry. The sharp edges of his usual demeanor seem dulled, replaced by something softer, something warmer. Izuku's as he tightens, the conflicting emotions swirling inside him threatening to overwhelm. When they reach the cafeteria, Katsuki keeps their hands joined even as they grab trays and food, his fierce glare warding off any potential comments from other students. They find a table near the corner, and Katsuki finally releases Izuku's hand, only to sit so close their knees bump under the table. The silence doesn't last long. Whispers ripple through the cafeteria, some bold enough to reach Izuku's ears. Are they seriously a thing now? Bakugu's weirdly protective of him today. Midoriya looks so flustered, it's kind of cute. Izuku sighs, his face buried in his hands. He doesn't know how much longer he can keep this up. The quirk's effects are making everything so complicated, so messy. But for now, at least, Katsuki seems content. And, selfish as it is, Izuku can't deny that some part of him is glad. Even if it's all fake, for just a little while, he's allowed to imagine. So, Midoriya, Mina starts, her voice dripping with playful curiosity as she leans forward across the table. Her eyes are practically sparkling with mischief. Is Blasty usually this sweet to you? She gestures toward Katsuki, who is seated beside Izuku, his posture relaxed but unmistakably possessive, one arm draped casually over the back of Izuku's chair. Izuku's eyes flick between her and Katsuki, a flush creeping up his neck, his mouth suddenly dry. He stammers, his mind racing to make sense of the question. Oh, come on, don't play dumb, Kirishima chimes in with a hearty laugh. He gives Izuku a teasing grin, nudging his elbow into Katsuki's side like they share some unspoken bond. You two are adorable. Who would have thought Bakubro would be such a softie? Izuku's brain short-circuits. Adorable. Katsuki, the softie. That was the last thing Izuku ever expected to hear, and the idea of their relationship being so public makes his heart thud uncomfortably. He opens his mouth to protest, but before he can find the words, Katsuki cuts him off. Suddenly, a spoonful of rice is shoved in front of his face. Open, Katsuki orders, his tone authoritative and laced with something between smug satisfaction and silent demand. Izuku blinks in surprise, momentarily frozen. Kaken, I can feed myself, he protests softly, his voice wavering as he casts a furtive glance around the table. His cheeks are practically burning now, and the soft rustle of the other students' voices only heightens his embarrassment. Shut up, Deku, Katsuki snaps, but it's not harsh, there's something more insistent in it, something deeper. He leans in just slightly, his gaze intense, unwavering. I said open. You're gonna eat or I'm gonna shove it in your face. Izuku freezes, and for a moment his whole body tenses. The words, though spoken casually, carry an unmistakable weight. The glare Katsuki gives him, sharp, fierce, unrelenting, feels almost like a challenge. But then there's something else beneath it, a flicker of hurt, an unspoken vulnerability that Izuku catches before it disappears again. The love quirk is still so fresh in his mind, still messing with Katsuki's emotions, and Izuku can't shake the guilt twisting in his stomach. He doesn't want to upset Katsuki. Not now, not when it's already so complicated. With a soft sigh, Izuku relents, opening his mouth and allowing Katsuki to feed him. The rice is warm, perfectly cooked, and Katsuki's satisfied smirk grows wider as he watches Izuku take the bite, as if the very act of feeding him has won him some kind of victory. Ah, look at you two. Mina squeals from across the table, clasping her hands together dramatically. Her voice is full of exaggerated affection. I didn't think Bakugo could be so sweet. Kirishima's laugh rings out, warm and lighthearted, as he nudges Katsuki's shoulder with a playful shove. Man, you're really pulling out all the stops, huh? Didn't peg you as the doting type, but you're killing it, Bakubro. He sounds both surprised and impressed, and the slight teasing tone only adds to the buzz in the air. Katsuki leans back in his chair with a cocky grin plastered across his face, one arm still casually draped around Izuku's shoulders, pulling him closer as if he owns the space they occupy. "Dean right, I'm killing it," Katsuki declares, his voice loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. He turns to Izuku, his expression all smug confidence. "I'm the best boyfriend Deku's ever gonna have. Not that he's gonna have another. If anyone tries, I'll F them up real bad." Izuku's face turns an even darker shade of red, and he immediately covers his face with his hands, wishing he could somehow disappear into the floor. His heart races, though he can't quite tell if it's from embarrassment or the strange, inexplicable fluttering in his eye. Maybe it's a little bit of both. The possessiveness in Katsuki's words shouldn't feel so warm, so right, but Izuku can't deny it. "Kaken," he mutters, barely audible, wishing for the ground to swallow him whole. His hands shake slightly as he tries to hide behind them. Why do you have to say stuff like that? "Don't be shy, Deku," Katsuki says with a grin, giving Izuku's shoulder a reassuring squeeze. His voice drops to something softer, almost teasing, but there's an undeniable sincerity behind it. "You know you're grateful I love you this much?" Izuku feels his 𝗧𝗍𝗧 tighten, and he hesitates for a moment before slowly lowering his hands from his face. His gaze softens, his breath coming a little easier. "I am," he murmurs, his voice quiet but earnest. "It's the truth. No matter how complicated the circumstances are, or how surreal it all feels, he's grateful. Grateful for this moment, even if it's fleeting. Grateful for this connection with Katsuki, even if it's only an illusion created by a quirk. He'll hold on to it as long as he can, even if it's not real." The table falls into a brief, comfortable silence. Mina and Kirishima exchange knowing looks, their eyes bright with amusement. Uraraka, Shuto, and Ida, however, watch him with a little more concern, their gazes unreadable but unmistakably cautious. They know this isn't normal. They know the truth, that this is the love quirk playing with Katsuki's emotions, making everything feel much more intense and complicated than it really is. Izuku feels the weight of their gazes, but for a moment he shuts out the worry. He doesn't want to think about that right now. Instead, he focuses on the warmth of Katsuki's hand resting on his shoulder, the faint pressure of his body leaning in just a little closer, the reassuring presence that's both comforting and completely overwhelming. "Deku," Katsuki says, interrupting his thoughts, his tone low but insistent. He shoves another spoonful of rice in front of Izuku's mouth, his hand firm, as if he's unwilling to take no for an answer. "Stop spacing out and eat." Izuku looks at him for a second, a mix of fondness and exasperation tugging at the corners of his lips. He can't help it. Despite everything, despite how complicated this all feels, he smiles, a small, soft smile. "Kaken," he replies, taking the bite with a quiet sigh. For now, that's enough. Just for a little while, he'll let himself have this moment with Katsuki. Even if it's all a dream, even if it's all fleeting, it's a memory he'll hold on to, one he'll never forget. The day feels like a haze, a disorienting blur of faces and voices that seem to blend together in an almost dreamlike rhythm. Each class drags on, every interaction coated with a strange sense of unreality. Izuku feels like he's walking a tightrope, one foot carefully placed in front of the other as he navigates the delicate balance between managing Katsuki's overwhelming affection and keeping their classmates from asking too many questions. It's exhausting, trying to make everything seem normal, when nothing about today feels normal. But at the same time, it's not entirely unpleasant. There's something undeniably comforting in the constant presence of Katsuki beside him, even if it's a presence that feels too intense, too consuming. The final bell rings, snapping him out of his thoughts, and he barely has time to gather his things before he feels Katsuki's familiar presence beside him. Katsuki is already waiting for him, arms crossed tightly over his usual scowl in place. It's the kind of look that would make most people give him a wide berth, but Izuku isn't most people. He feels a flutter in his 𝗧𝗧 at the sight of Katsuki, and before he can say anything, Katsuki is tugging him along, their friends trailing behind them with knowing grins. Izuku can hear their amused whispers but chooses to ignore them, focusing instead on the hand that still holds his firmly, the warm pressure of Katsuki's fingers against his own. They walk in relative silence down the hall, the noise of the school around them fading into the background. Katsuki's hand remains on his. Izuku feels the warmth of it spread through his skin, like a spark that catches in his igniting something deep inside. It's as if the whole world is standing still and theirs. Only the two of them, walking side by side. By the time they reach Izuku's room, Katsuki stops and turns to face him, his expression softer than usual, though still bearing the familiar furrow of his brows. Izuku tries to hide the surprise that flashes across his face, but it's impossible to miss how Katsuki's gaze lingers on him, like he's trying to read something in Izuku's eyes. "I'll walk you in," Katsuki says, his voice gruff but with an undercurrent of something that Izuku can't quite place. He doesn't give Izuku a choice, pushing the door open and stepping inside without waiting for permission. Katsuki scans the room with a quick, practiced look, his gaze sharp and calculating as if searching for any possible threat. Then, with a quiet huff, he glances back at Izuku. Looks fine. Izuku laughs softly, his heart fluttering at the protectiveness in Katsuki's actions. It's such a strange, almost surreal moment. This fierce, stubborn boy taking such care over something as simple as his room. Thanks, Kaken, he says, his voice a little breathless. You didn't have to walk me all the way here, you know? Shut up, Katsuki mutters, his gaze darting away, though there's a slight flush creeping up his neck. He looks almost embarrassed, and it makes Izuku's 𝗧𝗔𝗁𝗍 tighten with something warm, something he can't quite identify. Course I did. Not letting you out of my sight. Not when. He suddenly cuts himself off, shaking his head as if dismissing whatever he was about to say. Never mind. There's a moment of silence, thick with unspoken words. Katsuki takes a step closer, his arms coming around Izuku in a firm, almost desperate hug. Izuku freezes for just a second, caught off guard by the intensity of it. But then, as always, his body responds before his mind can catch up, and he melts into the embrace, his arms winding around Katsuki in return, holding him just as tightly. Can't you just stay in my room? Katsuki murmurs, his voice low and almost pleading, like a whisper only meant for Izuku. I don't think I'll sleep if you're not there. Izuku's breath catches in his throat, and his heart stutters, the words leaving him speechless for a moment. He presses his face into Katsuki's shoulder, the familiar scent of him, sharp, warm, and undeniably Katsuki, filling his senses. His pulse quickens, thundering in his ears. I don't think that's a good idea, Kaken, he says softly, though the words feel like a betrayal. The weight of them sits heavy in his maybe next time. Katsuki pulls back just enough to look at him, his eyes narrowed with clear disappointment, like he's been slapped. The change in his expression is immediate, like 𝗧𝗵𝗲 has been flipped, and Izuku hates how much it hurts to see it. Katsuki doesn't hide his emotions, not even when they're raw, and the sting of that is more than Izuku can bear. Next time? Katsuki huffs, sulking like a child who's been denied their favorite toy. Fine. But you better not make me wait long. Izuku manages a small, sad smile, trying to ease the tension, though he aches at the thought of disappointing Katsuki. I won't, he promises, though part of him knows he can't guarantee that. Katsuki probably wouldn't even want to see his face when this is over. A sleepover is completely out of the equation. Katsuki lingers for a moment, still holding him with that strong grip on his shoulders, as if reluctant to let go. Then his gaze sharpens, the mischievous glint returning to his eyes, and he lets out a smirk that sends a thrill straight to Izuku's gut. If you're kicking me out, then you owe me something, nerd. Izuku blinks, confusion written all over his face. Owe you something? Like what? Katsuki leans in just a little closer, his voice dropping low and teasing. A embrace, he says, his smirk widening. Or I'm not leaving. Izuku's face turns bright red, and his hands flail in a helpless panic. Kaken. I can't just. You totally can, Katsuki interrupts with a confident grin, his gaze never wavering. Izuku's breath catches in his throat, and for a moment, he doesn't know how to respond. His mind goes blank, and the pressure of Katsuki's eyes on him makes his entire body flush with warmth. Finally, in a moment of sheer panic and determination, he stands on his toes, pressing a quick, trembling embrace to Katsuki's cheek before pulling back as fast as he can. There, he stammers, his heart racing so fast he's sure it might burst from his 𝗧𝗍𝗁𝗍𝗂. Katsuki raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed with the lack of enthusiasm. On the cheek. Really, that's all you're getting? Izuku exclaims, his voice high and squeaky, his hands still flailing helplessly at his sides. Katsuki chuckles, ruffling Izuku's hair with a playful tug. Fine, I'll let you off easy. For now. He pulls Izuku into one last tight hug, holding him so firmly that Izuku feels like he might melt into the embrace. It's almost possessive, but there's a softness to it, a warmth that Izuku can't deny. Night, nerd, Katsuki murmurs, his voice gentler than usual, like a quiet sigh into the space between them. Good night, Kaken, Izuku replies, his voice trembling with emotion. He watches as Katsuki finally pulls away, heading toward the door, his steps slow but sure. With a final wave and a lingering glance, Katsuki steps out, the door clicking shut behind him. Izuku presses a hand to his 𝗧𝗂𝗧𝗏, feeling the erratic rhythm of his heartbeat as it echoes through his body. It a single name over and over again. Kaken. 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 He lets himself smile, a soft, contented smile that feels like it might burst from his 𝗧𝗓. For now, he'll hold onto this strange, fleeting moment, because no matter how this all ends, no matter how the reality of it all comes crashing down around them, Izuku knows he'll carry these memories with him forever. They'll be a part of him. Boys. Izuku sits on the edge of his bed, his hands loosely clasped in his lap as he stares at the ceiling. The room feels quieter than usual, the air thick with an almost tangible stillness. It's as if the absence of Katsuki's intense energy has left an unspoken void that's too loud, too heavy. He runs a hand through his messy hair, sighing deeply as his mind drifts, the weight of the past few days finally catching up to him. He's just beginning to settle into the rare peace when a soft, rhythmic knock at the door breaks through his thoughts. He blinks, surprised. It's not Katsuki, is it? His 𝗧𝗓 tightens as he wonders if something has happened, if his friend has come back to check on him, or if maybe the quirk is flaring up again. For a brief, fleeting moment, he considers pretending he isn't there. It's easier to stay in his little bubble, to not face any more questions or uncomfortable conversations. But the knocking continues, quiet but persistent, and his resolve crumbles. He gets up with a quiet groan, and as he opens the door, he's met with the familiar faces of Shuto, Ida, and Uraraka. Their expressions hold a quiet mix of concern and curiosity, and Izuku's stomach drops at the intensity of their gaze. Hey, guys, Izuku says, trying to sound casual as he steps aside to let them in. What's up? They file into the room, each one taking their own seat. Uraraka perches herself on the chair by his desk, her legs crossed as she watches him with a gentle expression. Ida stands by the wall, arms crossed and posture rigid, his serious eyes locked on him, and Shuto leans casually against the doorframe, his mismatched eyes never leaving Izuku's face, studying him intently. We wanted to check on you, Uraraka says, her voice soft and concerned. You've had a lot to deal with lately. Izuku's cheeks flush, the rush of heat creeping up his neck. Oh, I'm fine. Really? He stammers, offering a quick smile that feels strained. It's not that bad. I think we're managing. There were a few close calls when Kaken was about to lose his temper and lash out, but I think we handled it okay. I'm just glad he's not losing control of his emotions again and causing a mess. I'll do my best to keep it that way until he's back to normal. Shuto tilts his head slightly, his mismatched eyes narrowing with a hint of skepticism. That's not what we meant. Izuku blinks, confusion flickering across his face. What do you mean? Ida adjusts his glasses, his usually formal demeanor replaced with an unexpected seriousness. Midoriya, we've been observing you, he says, his tone firm. It's clear you've been under a lot of pressure, but he pauses as if considering his words carefully. It's also clear that you've been enjoying Bakugo's attention more than you're letting on. Izuku's breath catches, and his voice comes out higher than usual. His face burns a deep crimson, and he can feel the heat of his embarrassment rush to the tips of his ears. It's not like that. He's my friend. I'm helping him through this quirk thing, that's all. Deku, Uraraka says gently, her voice soft but insistent as she leans forward, her eyes full of understanding. You don't have to hide it. We can all see it. You have feelings for him, don't you? Izuku freezes, his mind reeling. The question hangs in the air, heavy with truth. He's never been good at hiding how he feels, and it's painfully obvious now. He opens his mouth to deny it, to say something, anything that will convince them otherwise, but the words die on his tongue. Denying it feels pointless. It's written all over his face, isn't it? The way he's been reacting to Katsuki's sudden affection, the way his heart races every time Katsuki looks at him with that soft intensity, as if Izuku is the most important person in his world. How can he lie about that? He sighs, shoulders slumping in resignation. But yes, I like him, he admits quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. But I have for a long time. But it doesn't really matter, he adds quickly, the words coming out in a rush, his tone defensive. I know that Kaken doesn't feel that way about me. This is just the quirk. Once it's gone, he'll go back to normal. Shudo's expression softens, but the frown deepens on his face. And you're okay with that? Izuku forces a smile, but it doesn't quite reach his eyes. Of course I am, he replies, though it sounds more like a plea than a truth. I've known Kaken my whole life. I know who he is. I know this isn't real. I don't have any false hope. I never did. I, of all people, know that this is impossible. I'm just trying to help him until the quirk wears off. Until he's back to normal. But isn't it strong? Uraraka asks, her voice filled with concern. Letting him act like this, knowing it's not real. Won't it hurt more when he stops? Izuku's heart clenches painfully, and his gaze drops to the floor, unable to meet her eyes. Yeah, he admits quietly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. It'll hurt. But it's worth it if it helps him. Kaken would do the same for me if the roles were reversed. And, a part of me, he cuts himself off, shaking his head as if trying to push away the feelings that are threatening to spill over. Never mind. No, Shudo says, his voice calm but insistent. What part of you? Izuku bites his lip, his hands clenching at his sides as if holding onto some fragile piece of himself. His 𝗧𝗔 tightens, and the words are almost too painful to speak, but he knows he can't hold them in anymore. A part of me wants to treasure this while it lasts, he says finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I know it's selfish. I know it is, and I feel terrible for taking advantage of the situation. But, even if it's fake, even if it's just the quirk, I want to remember what it feels like to have Kaken care about me like this. The room falls silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air like an unspoken promise. Uraraka's eyes shimmer with unshed tears, her expression filled with sympathy. Even Ida looks troubled, his usual steadfast composure cracked by the raw honesty of Izuku's confession. Shudo speaks first, his voice steady, almost a little too detached. Midoriya, it's not wrong to feel that way. But you have to think about yourself, too. Letting this continue might help him, but it could hurt you more in the long run. Izuku nods, though the pain in his 𝗧𝗔 is sharp and unforgiving. I know, he replies, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. But I can handle it. I'm used to dealing with my feelings on my own. This isn't any different. Uraraka reaches out, her hand warm and reassuring as she places it on his arm. You don't have to do it alone, though. We're here for you, Deku. Boys. Izuku manages a small smile at her words, his 𝗧𝗔 tightening in a way he hasn't quite figured out how to deal with. Thanks, Uraraka, he says softly. I mean it. Ida steps forward, his usual stern demeanor softened by genuine concern. If you're sure you can handle this, we'll respect your decision. But please, don't hesitate to lean on us if it becomes too much. I won't, Izuku promises, though a small part of him isn't sure if that's entirely true. He doesn't want to burden them, doesn't want to admit how heavy this all feels sometimes. But he's not sure he can bear it alone anymore. As his friends eventually leave, offering one last round of reassurances, Izuku stands there for a moment, leaning against the door. His heart is heavy, weighed down by the gravity of everything he's said and everything he feels. He knows what he's signed up for, knows it won't be easy. But for Katsuki, and for his own selfishness, he's willing to endure it. He just hopes he can find the strength to handle it, even if that means facing it all on his own once this ends. Izuku's pencil hovers uselessly over the page, his mind fogged with frustration as he stares down the tangled mess of polynomials mocking him in his notebook. No matter how many times he rewrites the problem, it refuses to make sense. His brain, usually so sharp when analyzing battle strategies or quirks, feels sluggish and uncooperative in the face of unforgiving exponents and variables. Izuku, Shudo's voice cuts through the low hum of classroom chatter, calm and deadpan as ever. You've been staring at that page for 5 minutes. Do you need me to set it on fire for inspiration? Izuku jolts, blinking rapidly as he's dragged out of his daze. His eyes flick to Shudo, whose face remains a mask of perfect neutrality as he sips from his ever-present thermos. The words take a moment to register, and when they do, Izuku waves his hands in frantic denial. Oh, no fire. It's fine, 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, really. I'm just trying to figure out the pattern here. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 raises a single eyebrow, his expression as calm as if he just suggested the most practical solution in the world. If you insist, he says lightly, taking another sip. Across the desk, a sharp snort draws Izuku's attention. Katsuki, who had been uncharacteristically silent up until now, lifts his head from his own notebook and levels Izuku with it. Pointed look. His crimson eyes gleam with mockery, and his lips twitch into a smirk. Sure looks like you're figuring it out, nerd. Izuku freezes under the weight of Katsuki's gaze, his fingers gripping the pencil so tightly that it might snap. I'm working on it, he stammers, cheeks burning. Yeah. Is that what you call it? Katsuki drawls, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Looks more like you're trying to bore the problem into 𝗬𝗵𝗲. Izuku sinks lower in his chair, his freckled face going beet red. The class around them has descended into its usual state of chaos during the break, chatter, the rustling of snack wrappers, and the occasional burst of laughter. But here in this small corner, it feels like Katsuki's focus is a spotlight, and Izuku is squarely caught in its beam. You're still stuck on that? Katsuki says louder this time, his smirk widening as he leans back in his chair with infuriating ease. Izuku shrinks under the attention. It's tricky, Kaken. But I'll get it, I promise. His voice is earnest, though tinged with the kind of desperation that comes from knowing he probably won't. Katsuki rolls his eyes and stands, sauntering over with an air of casual demps that only makes him seem more intimidating. He looms over Izuku's desk, arms crossed, his presence practically suffocating. Hopeless, he mutters under his breath. Then louder, I'll help you after class. Izuku's head snaps up so fast he almost gives himself whiplash. You don't have to. Of course I do, Katsuki interrupts, his tone blunt but leaving no room for argument. You're my boyfriend. I'm not letting you bomb the next test just 'cause you can't figure out basic math. The room goes eerily silent. Every single conversation screeches to a halt, heads whipping toward Katsuki and Izuku with the force of a small explosion. The words hang in the air like a firework frozen mid-burst, and Izuku can practically feel the weight of a dozen wide-eyed stares boring into him. Mina is the first to recover, clapping her hands together and squealing like she's just witnessed her favorite ship become canon. Oh my god, 𝗵𝗲𝗍 helping Midoriya study. That's so adorable. She gushes, her voice pitched high with excitement. But Kubro's got a soft side, Kirishima teases, his grin wide and teasing. You gonna be nice when you tutor him, or is it gonna be, like, softer yelling? Katsuki turns on him, his glare sharp enough to cut steel. There's no such thing as soft yelling, shitty hair, he snaps. And shut the hell up, all of you. This isn't a DMN soap opera. Oh, but it kind of is, Mina sing-songs, her grin wicked. We're all just wondering if tutoring Midoriya is special treatment. You're not exactly known for your patience, 𝗵𝗲𝗍. That's because the rest of you are idiots? Katsuki barks, his voice carrying enough heat to make Kaminari flinch back in his seat. Deku's different? Izuku feels his face light up like a beacon, his hands waving frantically as he tries to downplay the situation. Really, it's not a big deal. Kaken doesn't have to. Shut it, nerd, Katsuki growls, silencing him with a glare. Of course I'm helping you. Don't act like it's some kind of miracle. He is thumb toward Izuku's notebook. After class. My room. We're killing this stupid math problem, and you're gonna stop looking like your brain just exploded. Izuku ducks his head, a shy smile creeping onto his face despite the embarrassment. Thanks, Kaken, he murmurs softly. Yeah, Katsuki mutters, reaching out to ruffle Izuku's hair in a gesture so quick and unexpected that it leaves Izuku blinking in surprise. Don't get all mushy about it. We've got work to do. Cute, 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 observes from his seat, his tone as infuriatingly calm as ever. You two really don't spend much time apart lately, do? Katsuki rounds on him instantly, bristling like an offended porcupine. Of course we do. You got a problem with that, half and half. 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 shrugs, his expression as placid as a still lake. Not really. Just an observation. Stick to your ice and fire, you walking AC unit. Katsuki snarls, his teeth practically glinting. This isn't your business. The room erupts into laughter, Mina doubling over and Kaminari wiping tears from his eyes. Even Izuku can't hold back the giggle that escapes him, muffled behind his hands. As the noise dies down, Katsuki gives Izuku one last look, his crimson eyes narrowing. Be ready after class, nerd. You're not embarrassing me in the rankings over some stupid math. Izuku nods, warmth blooming in his 𝗧𝗍𝗧 despite Katsuki's rough tone. I'll try my best, Kaken. Ian right you will, Katsuki mutters, his scowl softening ever so slightly. Katsuki's room is quieter than Izuku expects. The shelves are impeccably neat, with books, weights, and miscellaneous trinkets organized in precise rows. It's all so Katsuki, efficient and controlled, yet there's a surprising sense of warmth. A worn All Might poster clings stubbornly to one wall, its corners curled with age, while a faint scent of caramel lingers in the air, blending with the clean sharpness of Katsuki's cologne. It feels lived in, like Katsuki, for all his explosive temper and sharp edges, has carved out a place where he can simply be. Izuku steps inside hesitantly, his heart thudding in his 𝗧𝗍𝗧. He's been here before, of course, but only in the noisy chaos of their friend groups. This is the first time it's just the two of them. That changes everything. It feels intimate. Quit hovering, Katsuki grumbles from behind him, kicking the door shut with the heel of his foot. The solid click of the latch startles Izuku, and he jumps slightly, earning an exasperated snort. You're acting like I'm about to eat you or something. And no, it's not that. Izuku stammers, clutching his notebook like a lifeline. I've never really studied with someone like this before. Katsuki rolls his eyes, already shrugging out of his blazer and tossing it carelessly over the back of his desk chair. Yeah, like that's an excuse to stand there gawking like a dumbass. He grabs his math textbook and flops unceremoniously onto the bed. With a pat of his hand on the spot next to him, he adds, "Sit down, nerd. We're not getting anything done with you standing there like a DMN statue." Izuku hesitates, his eyes darting to the bed. Katsuki looks so casual, propped up on one elbow, the book lying open in front of him. The sight sends a nervous flutter through Izuku's 𝗧𝗍𝗧, but he nods and moves to sit cross-legged beside him. The mattress dips slightly under their combined weight, and Izuku tries not to focus on the fact that their knees are almost touching. All right, Katsuki says, flipping through the pages of his textbook. Where'd you get stuck earlier? Izuku fumbles with his notebook, flipping to the offending problem. His finger hovers over a particularly tangled equation. I just couldn't figure out how to simplify it. Katsuki leans closer, his shoulder brushing against Izuku's. The warmth of his presence makes Izuku's breath hitch, but Katsuki doesn't seem to notice. He grabs a pencil and starts scribbling in the margins of the notebook, his tone firm but surprisingly patient. Teeth, that's easy. You're overthinking it. You group these terms first, then factor this out. Got it? Izuku watches intently, his eyes wide as he nods along. That makes sense now. I think I get it. Good, Katsuki says, smirking. He flips to a clean page and scrawls another problem down, shoving it toward Izuku. Let's see if you really get it. Do this one. Izuku takes the pencil with trembling hands, his brow furrowing as he works through the problem. Katsuki stays close, watching every slide of the pencil like a hawk. When Izuku finishes and hesitantly looks up, Katsuki scans the answer. Nailed it, he declares, his smirk widening. You're not as hopeless as you act. The unexpected praise sends warmth rushing through Izuku's 𝗧𝗍𝗧. He ducks his head, biting his lip to hide the shy smile spreading across his face. Thanks, Kaken. That means a lot. Yeah, Katsuki mutters, scratching the back of his neck. There's a faint pink tinge creeping up his ears, and Izuku wonders if Katsuki realizes how soft his voice had gotten just then. They continue working through the chapter, Katsuki's sharp instructions tempered by a quiet gentleness. His gruff, good or knew you'd get it, after every solved problem makes Izuku's heart flutter, no matter how much Katsuki tries to downplay it. When they finally finish, Izuku sets his pencil down with a relieved sigh. "Thank you, Kaken. I feel so much more confident now." Katsuki stretches, his shirt riding up slightly to reveal a strip of toned stomach. Izuku quickly averts his gaze, but his cheeks are already flaming. Katsuki notices, of course, and smirks. "Good," he says, his voice dropping an octave. "You're not leaving." Izuku blinks at him. I said," Katsuki repeats, crossing his arms, "you're staying the night. I don't like it when you're not around. It messes with me, okay?" The admission catches Izuku completely off guard. He stares, his heart twisting as he remembers the subtle ways Katsuki's mood shifts when they're apart, the restless tapping of his fingers, the tension in his shoulders, the rare moments of uncharacteristic silence. "It's the love quirk," Izuku murmurs, his voice barely above a whisper. Katsuki's jaw tightens, his gaze flicking to the side. "Yeah, probably. Whatever." His voice softens, almost trembling. "I don't care what it is. I just feel like CRP when you're gone. So stay. Please." The vulnerability in Katsuki's voice is so raw, so unguarded, that it takes Izuku's breath away. After a moment, he nods, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "All right, Kaken. I'll stay." The relief that washes over Katsuki's face is so profound, it nearly makes Izuku tear up. Katsuki doesn't just look relieved. He looks happy, his lips curving into a rare, genuine grin. "Good," Katsuki mutters, trying to sound gruff, but his voice is too soft to sell it. He grabs an extra blanket from his closet and tosses it onto the bed. That night, they lie side by side, close but not quite touching. Katsuki keeps sneaking glances at Izuku, his hand twitching like he wants to reach out but doesn't quite know how. "You're no fun," Katsuki finally grumbles when Izuku gently denies his attempts to cuddle. "What's the point of you staying if I can't even hold you?" Izuku laughs softly, the sound light and warm. "Good night, Kaken." Katsuki huffs, muttering something under his breath about stupid rules, but he doesn't push. When Izuku wakes in the middle of the night, though, it's to the feeling of strong arms wrapped snugly around him. His face is pressed against Katsuki's 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat soothing. Katsuki's warmth surrounds him, grounding him in a way Izuku hadn't expected but craved all the same. He should pull away. He knows he should. But he doesn't. Instead, he snuggles closer, letting himself indulge in the rare moment of peace Katsuki's embrace offers. For once, Izuku lets himself be selfish. Izuku stirs awake to a cocoon of warmth that feels both unfamiliar and comforting. His eyelids flutter open, and he's greeted by the sight of Katsuki's 𝗧𝗔 rising and falling steadily in front of him, his strong arms wrapped securely around Izuku like he's something precious. The world feels quiet, like the moments before dawn stretch endlessly, just for them. Izuku's breath catches as he tilts his head back slightly, his gaze locking with Katsuki's. Katsuki is awake, his crimson eyes softened by the morning light. There's none of the usual sharpness in his expression, just an open tenderness that makes Izuku's heart stutter in his "Morning, nerd," Katsuki murmurs, his voice rough but warm. His lips quirk up slightly, and before Izuku can even think to respond, Katsuki leans down, pressing a slow, deliberate embrace to Izuku's forehead. The touch lingers, soft but certain, sending a rush of heat across Izuku's entire face. "Good morning, Kaken," Izuku stammers, his voice coming out in a squeak. He can feel the flush crawling down his neck, but he doesn't dare move, caught somewhere between embarrassment and disbelief. Katsuki's smirk widens, clearly pleased with Izuku's reaction. "Right, it's a good morning," he says, his tone brimming with confidence. Izuku squirms, trying to untangle himself from Katsuki's hold without being too obvious about it. Katsuki eventually lets him go, though his arms slacken reluctantly, and he watches Izuku with an amused glint in his eyes as Izuku sits up and tries to gather himself. They fall into a comfortable routine as the morning unfolds. Katsuki showers first, leaving Izuku in his room with a sharp, "Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone, nerd." Izuku blinks after him, still trying to process the soft, affectionate moments from earlier. When Katsuki returns, his damp hair sticking up in every direction and his uniform crisp and perfect, his chin at Izuku. Your turn, he grumbles, his tone a little gruff. I'll make sure you don't trip over your own DMN feet. Izuku shuffles to his own room, cheeks burning, as Katsuki follows him like a watchful shadow. Once inside, Katsuki plants himself on Izuku's bed, arms crossed, radiating an air of authority as though even the act of showering might be too much for Izuku to handle unsupervised. Izuku doesn't argue, he knows better than to try. But when he struggles with his necktie after getting dressed, fumbling to make the knot sit right, Katsuki lets out a long-suffering sigh and stands. Move, Katsuki orders, swatting Izuku's hands away. You're hopeless. Izuku freezes as Katsuki steps in close, deftly looping and pulling the tie into a perfect knot. Katsuki's fingers brush against Izuku's collar, his touch unexpectedly gentle. Izuku swallows strong, the proximity sending his thoughts spiraling. There, Katsuki mutters, giving the tie a final tug before stepping back just enough to meet Izuku's gaze. Can't have you looking like some half-assed mess? Izuku glances up, his heart hammering. Their faces are so close he can feel the faint warmth of Katsuki's breath, and for a fleeting moment he swears Katsuki's sharp crimson eyes soften. Thanks, Kaken, Izuku manages, his voice quiet but genuine. Yeah, Katsuki grumbles, turning away quickly. Izuku doesn't miss the faint pink dusting the tips of Katsuki's ears. By the time they make it to the common room, Katsuki is back to his usual brisk, commanding self. Sit, he snaps, pointing at a stool by the counter. Izuku obeys, still feeling a little lightheaded from the morning's events. Katsuki moves around the kitchen with practiced ease, pulling ingredients together like it's second nature. Within minutes, Katsuki sets a plate in front of Izuku, perfectly scrambled eggs, golden toast, and neatly sliced apple pieces. Katsuki takes the stool next to him, eating his own food with a no-nonsense efficiency, though his gaze flickers to Izuku every few moments. Izuku takes a bite, humming in delight. This is really good, Kaken, he says, beaming. Katsuki doesn't respond immediately, but his smirk grows a fraction wider. Course it is. I don't have but anything. Their quiet moment is interrupted as the rest of the class begins filtering into the common room. Mina's sharp gasp is the first thing Izuku hears. Blasty made breakfast for Midoriya, she squeals, elbowing Kaminari, who grins like he's just been handed the juiciest gossip of his life. Blasty's all domestic now. Mina teases, her eyes sparkling. Look at you, a proper boyfriend already. Shut the hell up, raccoon eyes, Katsuki snaps, his glare cutting, though it does little to dissuade her. Like I need your demon commentary. Kaminari edges closer, pointing at the apple slices on Izuku's plate. Hey Midoriya, mind if I touch it and die, dunce face, Katsuki growls, leaning subtly toward Izuku like he's protecting a treasure. Kaminari freezes, his hands shooting up in surrender. Alright geez. Overprotective much. Kaminari mutters, retreating back to his seat. In right I am, Katsuki mutters, not bothering to hide the edge of possessiveness in his tone. Izuku ducks his head, his face burning as he focuses on his plate. The rest of the class settles around them, the usual morning chatter filling the air, but Izuku feels like the world has shrunk to just him and Katsuki again. For all his bark and sharp edges, Katsuki's focus remains unwavering. There's a softness in his gaze that makes Izuku a warmth that feels so real it hurts. Izuku doesn't know how long this will last, but he knows one thing. Mornings like this, with Katsuki by his side, feel like something he'll never want to let go of. Class with All Might always carries a certain energy, one born of anticipation and excitement for whatever creative challenge he's cooked up that day. As he steps to the front of the room, larger than life even in his slightly deflated form, the students are already buzzing. Today, though, the room practically hums with curiosity. Today's lesson, All Might announces, his signature grin in place, will focus on coordination and strategy. You'll be working in pairs to hone your teamwork skills. A ripple of chatter spreads through the room. Heads turn, eyes darting as everyone silently claims their preferred partner. Izuku feels the familiar churn of nerves in his 𝗧𝗑𝗫. It's not like he's bad at team exercises. It's just, I'll assign the pairs. All Might continues with a benevolent wave of his hand, scattering any plans before they can fully form. It'll be a valuable chance to adapt and work with new people. A collective groan rises from the class, but Izuku can't help a soft sigh of relief. At least this way, he won't have to awkwardly ask anyone, all right. Midoriya, All Might calls, scanning his clipboard, you'll be paired with Todoroki? Izuku glances at Shuto, who nods calmly from across the room, his expression unreadable as always. It's not a bad pairing. In fact, it's a strong one. They've worked well together before, and Shuto's methodical approach balances Izuku's analytical style. Izuku gathers his things, preparing to move toward him. But before he can take a step, a firm hand clamps down on his arm. Like hell he is. Katsuki's voice is loud enough to make half the class flinch. He's on his feet, the chair scraping loudly against the floor as his glare locks onto All Might. Izuku freezes, his notebook pressed awkwardly against his 𝗧𝗑𝗫 as Katsuki's words hang in the air. Kaken. Izuku hisses, twisting to face him, his face already warming. It's not a big deal. It's just for practice. The hell it isn't? Katsuki snaps, his eyes blazing. You're not putting Deku with Icy Hot. He's my 𝗵𝗵𝗲 boyfriend. The class erupts into a cacophony of gasps, giggles, and whispered commentary. Mina's jaw drops, and she practically vibrates with suppressed laughter as she elbows Kaminari. Did he just? Mina whispers, eyes wide with glee. Oh, he did, Kaminari whispers back, grinning. Blasty staking his claim. Izuku feels his soul attempting to escape his body as he stares up at Katsuki. Kaken, please. Don't please me. Katsuki barks, keeping his grip on Izuku's arm but softening it enough that it's more grounding than restraining. You're not working with him. What's the point of this CRP if you're splitting up real teams? Deku and I are gonna be pro heroes together. Partners. And he glances at Izuku, his voice dropping enough to make Izuku's face go crimson. Boyfriends? Kaken. Izuku squeaks, his voice hitting a pitch that draws more laughter from their classmates. His gaze darts to All Might, who looks like he's desperately weighing the value of intervention against the entertainment of watching this unfold. Bakugo, All Might says at last, his tone gentle but firm, this is about adaptability. You'll both benefit from. No, we won't. Katsuki interrupts, his expression fiercely determined. What if Icy Hot screws up and gets Deku hurt? Not happening. Across the room, Shuto raises an eyebrow, his calm demeanor unshaken. I assure you, Bakugo, I'm perfectly capable. Shut it, Icy Hot. Katsuki growls, his free hand sparking faintly. He's mine. Got it. A smirk tugs at Shuto's lips. I wasn't aware we were negotiating custody. The tension is almost comical as Katsuki's sparks intensify, but Shuto's unbothered calmness only makes the situation funnier. Finally, Shuto sighs. Fine. I'll work with someone else. All Might claps his hands together, his relieved smile radiating his trademark positivity. Excellent. Midoriya, Bakugo, you're partners. Todoroki, you'll work with Ida. Mina's laugh breaks through the hum of conversation. Oh my god, they're so that couple, she whispers to Kirishima, who is grinning wide enough to strain his cheeks. Pinky. Katsuki snaps, his hand finally releasing Izuku so he can turn and glare at her. Mind your 𝗵𝗵𝗲 business. As the class moves to their respective partners, Izuku casts an apologetic glance at Shuto. I'm so sorry, he mouths, his cheeks still burning. Shuto shrugs, his lips twitching upward in the faintest ghost of a smile. Enjoy your teamwork, Izuku, he says, his tone impossibly neutral but somehow dripping with amusement. Izuku turns back to Katsuki, whose scowl remains firmly in place even as he settles into his seat. Kaken, he starts hesitantly, keeping his voice low. You didn't have to. Shut up, Katsuki mutters, opening his notebook. We're practicing. You and me. End of story. Despite Katsuki's gruff tone, Izuku can't help but notice the faint pink creeping up his ears. And though his face still burns with embarrassment, a small, reluctant smile tugs at Izuku's lips. For all his yelling, Katsuki's declaration lingers in Izuku's mind. He's my boyfriend. The words settle in Izuku's 𝗧𝗔 like a glowing ember, equal parts mortifying and comforting. As the lesson begins, Katsuki's focus is razor sharp, his usual fiery determination now channeled into their exercises. And though his barked instructions are peppered with the occasional insult, his movements are in sync with Izuku's, effortless and natural in a way that reminds Izuku exactly why they make such a good team. Even as the class continues, Izuku can't help stealing glances at Katsuki. There's something grounding about the way Katsuki moves, the way he's always ready to back Izuku up without hesitation. And for all his bluster, there's a warmth beneath his gruffness that makes Izuku's heart ache in the best way. When the exercise ends and All Might dismisses them, Katsuki grabs Izuku's wrist, not tightly, but enough to stop him from wandering off. "Don't even think about pairing up with anyone else next time," Katsuki mutters, his eyes flicking away as if embarrassed. Izuku's heart stutters and he nods, his smile soft. "I won't, Kaken,"